Today, Kevin Kane flew in to talk about quantum computing, quantum cryptography, China, Asia's role in the world stage, how the United States is seen by other countries, how ethics interfere with US dominance, and much more. This is the kind of conversation I've had with many of my guests off camera, but Kevin was open enough to discuss the sorts of things typically reserved for more intimate settings. This also happens to be the kind of discussions I envisioned for the show all along. This conversation may offend more delicate ears, but I think Kevin's ideas, while no doubt controversial, are still intriguing and worth discussing. So with that caveat aside, here's Kevin Kane. Hello and welcome to the RSnake show. Today I have Kevin Kane with me. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine.
Yeah. You flew in from where exactly?
Washington State.
Washington State. Oh, for some reason I thought you were a East Coast guy.
I was born on the East Coast.
Oh, maybe that's why I thought that. Oh, I thought for some reason I thought you were over in Maryland or somewhere. I
was born in New Jersey, in the countryside, $40,000 house, well water, septic tanks, riding motorcycles, running from the police because you don't have blinkers.
I see. So you're what gave Jersey a bad name. So we're here to talk about a bunch of things, I think, is probably what's going to end up happening. But who knows? We're talking about this off camera. And so on average, when I'm doing these research for these things, it takes between 4 and 6, I would say, on average hours. Some are not very much. Others are kind of a lot. Yours, I probably spent 16, maybe 18 hours on.
Wow.
Because there's a lot of rabbit holes. There's a lot of different places you could take this conversation. Okay. And so I have no expectations of where this is going to go. We're just going to see where we land. Okay. But to start it off, let's talk about quantum computing. And I know, for the audience's sake, they're probably going to lose us a little bit here and there in this conversation. Okay. So where possible, let's try to bring it as, in the realm of where most people are going to understand it. However, obviously there's some language that's a little bit more physics-y, although you are not a physicist. Nope. And so hopefully we can keep this more accessible, despite the fact that there will be some heavy stuff in there. Okay, what's quantum computing?
Quantum computing is the leverage of quantum mechanics to engage in computing. So, for example, storing data in depending on how much entanglement you have, and leveraging quantum entanglement and a lot of super complex physics that is real, that has a roadmap to being leveraged for computing. And one of the advantages of quantum computers is the ability to, like in signal processing, sort through larger data sets and find that signal much quicker. So it's going to have a profound impact on something like search space reduction. So if you Google search space reduction can apply to, unfortunately, encryption, like duplicating a key, a copy. It can also be applied to solving an optimization problem for like nuclear fusion or drug discovery. Quantum computing will solve, for example, the traveling salesman problem used for GPS mapping, which is not solved. And one of the biggest misconceptions is that people think there's only one type of quantum computer and that it's 20 or 30 years away, and that's totally nonsense. So there is something called a noisy intermediate scale quantum computer, and those are the ones that we have today or we have over the next 3 years. There's also a lot of like a call option, this surprise big win. So one of the lead candidate quantum computing companies for that surprise big win is PsiQuantum. And a lot of people don't know this, but it's for social proof, it's very interesting. So in quantum mechanics, we've heard of Schrodinger's cat. So in the box, there's a cat, and it's both alive and dead. Until you open it and observe it, then the quantum state is crippled, and it's either alive or dead. But the truth is, it's both before. And so if you open the box a trillion different times, there will be one, if you could reverse history, where it's alive. And we know this to be true in quantum mechanics and how it works. And that grandson of Mr. Schrodinger is the CEO of PsiQuantum. There's a long line of geniuses with a heritage and career of accumulating knowledge and expertise working on this kind of quantum computing. And there are many approaches to building a quantum computer. He has one in particular that is a favorite for people at places like DARPA and such. And he might surprise us with 1 million qubits in 72 months. That company is also very dark about some of their progress. They have an exclusive relationship with TSMC. There are very serious players involved. That's a large-scale quantum computer, like 1 million qubits. It's a fault-tolerant quantum computer. It's going to fly through factoring RSA at every level in minutes. RSA 4000 level is gone. It'll do it real time. So factoring, like RSA encryption depends on factoring. So that is the idea is that if you do like 62 times 62, when you reverse it, you can have like 2 times 2 times 4, 4 times 4 times, you go like that. Mm-hmm. And at a large number, like 1 trillion, right, that particular factor pattern is like the key. Mm-hmm. Well, a large-scale quantum computer will just zip through those answers. So that's why the NSA recently removed RSA from the approved list for commercial solutions. Mm-hmm. And that removal is effective in 24 months. All new products to the federal government are not supposed to be using RSA. So you can infer from the NSA's position, they take the threat of these call options and also the short-term solutions to the noisy ones as a threat to encryption. That's why they made the policy changes.
So part of the copious amount of times I spent on this research was I felt like I understood RSA fairly well, which is an encryption algorithm. It's actually many things, really, at the end of the day. But the important part of it was the factoring of primes. And I never really understood why that was such a... Why do cryptographers always just love primes so much? Like, what is it about primes? And so I did a bunch of work. I actually wrote an algorithm just to like see it for myself, and which is very nerdy, I know. But so I built 2 different versions, one using primes, one not using primes. And what I noticed right away is what you'd expect if you don't use primes is more things can factor into the product of whatever the 2 original numbers were. And I'm like, well, why would that matter? It seems like that doesn't really give you much if you're the attacker. You still have to go through the entire key space and factor all of it. Yeah, you might be able to get an answer, but you're not going to get the answer. It might also be able to encrypt, but it won't be able to decrypt. And that's when it occurred to me, well, that's the real question. The integrity is not in the privacy of it, it's in the tampering of it. So if I can tamper with it and change it, then that breaks one of the major tenets of cryptography. So primes are a really, really, really big deal. And so I'm like, okay, well, how do they do that? How do they find the primes? Where do they come from? And the answer is they have a bad algorithm that tries to find primes. It doesn't really seem to be perfect. Sometimes it finds primes, sometimes it doesn't. And that led me down another rabbit hole. Like, okay, well, what happens? Or do you always pick the same primes? Like, how does that algorithm work? And it turns out that in 2015 there was a pretty bad exploit. It was actually many different things that went wrong, but using something called logjam that would basically trick browsers into using the wrong encryption, using export grade encryption. So this is why the NSA saying, oh, you're allowed to use this externally, but you're not allowed to use it internally. Yeah, go ahead and use that broken thing externally. We don't care. It's export allowed.
Yeah.
That was pretty interesting to watch that paper, read through that paper and see how I think everyone just sort of nodded and said, yeah, that was known by the NSA. They knew how broken that was.
I think that the problem with quantum computers is that it will be able to find the prime without any exploits. So that's what a lot of people don't seem to understand. Like when we look at vulnerability research, like the Colonial Pipeline, they may have spent 3, 6, 9 months with a team of people to find an exploit, right? And the idea with a quantum computer is that in simple speak, it would unravel, it will prove that things that we thought were NP hard are not. And so you would just record, decrypt by basically unraveling, by, in this case, getting the prime every time.
So explain the record part, just so the audience understands what that means.
So when you, for example, use AWS and you use it, let's say you use a VPN and you connect to a UK server. I know that because we used to operate a consumer VPN. It doesn't go straight to the UK from here. It'll go like over India or other countries. And those countries will, if they can, record the traffic over their network. So they are storing and harvesting the recorded traffic over their network.
Which shouldn't matter because it's encrypted.
Well, that's the problem, right? So that's why one of the races behind quantum computing, including from China. See, if you look, it was a Boston Consulting Group report on spending on where in the stack of quantum computing and research are people spending the most money. And at the top of expenditure, meaning that there is nothing spending more than factoring. Factoring is at the peak of, there's like 3 other areas. The factoring is one of the areas that the Chinese government is spending the most money on in quantum research, is factoring. Well, why is that? Right? It's so that they can break RSA.
Right.
In fact, like 3 months ago, they published a paper bragging about an approach to break RSA 2048 using a noisy intermediate scale quantum computer, like 350 qubits. The method they were using, I don't really know a lot of it.
350.
That's it. That exists.
Wow, I thought we were up to like a couple dozen or something.
No.
Really? Wow.
IBM says they'll have 1,000 in like 24 months. IBM says they'll have 1,000 in like 24 months. So this is like a now stuff. In the terms of like, if you look at like how long it would take to transition, let's say, finance to new encryption, it'll take 7-10 years. So in that scale of timelines, these threats are now threats. Even if it's 5 years later, that's still a now threat in the scale of how long it would take to transition an industry to a new encryption standard.
Absolutely.
So guess what's going to happen? You're going to have attacks on encryption before we're completely transitioned. That is the reality.
I would say well beyond completely, barely transitioned. I mean, if you look at pretty much anything, I mean, just go walk into any enterprise, walk around and look at all of their old websites and broken infrastructure, and it's all from like 10 years ago. They're not going to update any of that.
I love this topic because there's always a personality in IT who knows it all, and they have seen everything, right? And they say, well, I've been doing this for 30 years and I'm a CISO, and I have never seen this threat for 30 years ago. They've been saying it happened. Well, like in all arguments, the easiest flaws to find that are the most crippling is not in the facts. It's in the assumptions. And there is one assumption that has the person who says that embarrassingly wrong. They were a CISO during peacetime between great powers. See, the internet, the public internet, the consumer user internet was built during a time of peace. Iraq and Afghanistan are not great powers. They're not formidable cyber threats to the United States. Russia is, and so is China. So in our international relations theory, like what you study at the War College or Georgetown, or if you want to work for the Department of State or an intelligence service, you might study that field. And we call that a great power war. They are very different. And the internet was built in a period of peace relative to, great power war, threats to actual internet. And we don't know how the internet will survive in a great power war. It might not. Somebody might record and decrypt every hour, let's say Dropbox's data out of a data center and dump it on the internet until there is not one user in the entire stack of Dropbox. It's just finished. So that it would be like a great power attack. And then there is this other personality type, because I've had a lot of conversations, and they say, well, China would never do that. And I say, that's not the China I know, because it's almost like their national security strategy should be called self-inflicted wound. It's like the Chinese national security strategy probably has China's national 2030 plan, self-inflicted wound. They are masters of self-inflicted wounds, and they absolutely would do something to the U.S. that harms them. That, in fact, that is who they are, doing that. Russia inflicts self-inflicted wounds on itself every day. So the argument that they wouldn't do it because it'll hurt themselves is null and void.
Well, I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of sound bites coming out of this. So back to the export issue here for a second. So the EFF basically said that code is speech, and so therefore it's free. I should be able to put out any algorithms. I should be able to talk about anything I want, and there should be no encryption period that is private. What do you think about that?
I lived overseas 10 years. And I lived in South Korea, which started out as an authoritarian country. I actually interviewed people who went to jail fighting for their revolution, right? These statements sound like people who've never been in that situation. So the question that I learned...
I strongly think you're right.
Ideals are great. We have to have them to strive for. But the question that I learned, thinking a little bit different, let's say from Western culture, is I would ask, how does that benefit me? Right? So if you make it all free, how does it benefit me exactly? And how does it cost me? What does it take away from me? And I think that if we're going to have a discussion like that, it should be data-driven. Does it have a negative impact on commerce? Does it have a negative impact on counterterrorism? Is there a middle ground? Does it have a negative effect on protecting intellectual property? Right? These things are obviously all very important. And then also, we're a country of laws. And in the United States, we also have a thing called lawful intercept, right? So I don't think that a person has a legal right to subvert the rule of law in the United States and try to cripple the American economy. You don't have that free right, right? You should be shoved into the trunk of a car and put in prison if you want to hurt the United States and our economy. I do not respect your opinion. You can say that, but the reality is you're threatening the things that I want from life, and I'm going to hurt you. As a person, I'm thinking I have to hurt you. I have to stop you. Because the thing is, it's like, if you tell me I'm going to hurt you, well, I'm going to hurt you first then. This is no longer an idea. This is no longer kid game. This is an adult game. And there are consequences as an adult for the things we do. I think that people who are immature, they never grew up out of being a child. They have an idealized view of the world. They'll say, like, if the United States, on this recent intelligence report that came out that was leaked, and they're like, the U.S. spies on other countries, right? Yeah, they should. That's their fucking job. They should be doing that. And they're like, why? Well, we do it too. I don't care that we do it. It should benefit me, right? I want the U.S. government doing things that benefits me. And if they're overseas causing problems and it benefits me, good. Because we're not one people of the world. We are a world of nations. And I don't care how people feel about that. It is a fact. And there's nothing you can do in my lifetime or the one after to change that. So pragmatically speaking, if I'm a businessman and I want to go overseas and create some jobs, I count on the U.S. government to benefit me so that I can do that. That's their job. We live in this kind of world, and I like this kind of world. I don't think there's a problem with it.
I remember maybe it was the first or second conversation I had with you quite a few years ago now. I said, what you're about to embark on is going to put you in the crosshairs of effectively every foreign government. And are you ready for it? I mean, not to say you shouldn't, but are you ready for it? Are you ready for someone to be outside your door or, in your phone or, constantly causing problems for you, hacking you, whatever, exposing any secrets you have? Are you ready for that? And I mean, I think something along the lines of hell yes. But
well, I don't think anybody invites the fog of war, right? Because anyone who says, oh, I'm ready for the fog of war is not ready for the fog of war. Fog of war requires eyes wide open, right? And don't speak out of turn. You don't know what will happen. I think tough guy speeches for serious people are a waste of time, right? So anyone who has seen death or seen tragedy, doesn't speak about it like it's a cool thing, right? Serious people are thinking about serious things. So if somebody threatens me, I'm thinking, where do they live? What law enforcement choices do I have? What are my recourses to either hurt them, stop them, or, inflict damage on them and undermine their ability to hurt me lawfully, of course, right? So these things are serious. They're not games. Of course, being in the crosshairs of, foreign government's not fun, but, guess what? I'm an American citizen, and I have the most powerful government behind my back if I use it appropriately. One time when I was overseas, someone asked me to give them a copy of code that I had on a drive, and they were very threatening about it. So you know what I did? It's really funny. I just wrote up a letter stating what they did. It's just a letter. It's not a piece of evidence. It's my account of the event. And I went to the U.S. Embassy, and I had them notarize the letter, right? And they're looking at me like, why are you notarizing the letter? I want the notarized letter, and they make a copy that they notarized it. Then I went back to that person in Asia, and I gave them the notarized letter. I had a copy. They said, why are you doing that? And I said, I hope you don't plan on going to the United States or sending your kids to school in the United States, because I'm going to make sure every single office, every field office of FBI, the local FBI knows it. Because if you mess with me, you're messing with the American government, because I'm a U.S. citizen. That's what they're there for. And that's why I love the U.S. It's there for me. The government has to be powerful to protect my interest overseas when I'm there doing business.
And did he fall for this ruse?
It's not a ruse.
Well, sort of.
I know somebody who had a problem in Singapore with someone, and it was over something petty, right? And they notified an FBI person, and they found that that person had committed wire fraud in the most arbitrary terms. Mm-hmm. Guess what? They were at LA airport sent back to Singapore. So it happens.
Yeah, if it's an actual crime, sure.
Yes. Well, that person had committed a crime, right?
Good.
So
okay, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So I have also heard you at least twice now say something along the lines of, we need to kind of put aside our niceness or our liberal values as a society because the rest of the world just doesn't see it that way. And if we want to play on an equal playing field, we have to play by the same kinds of rules that everyone else is playing by.
Okay, so there's a lot of nuance there. Before I get to this topic, I want to go to the previous one.
Okay.
We work in post-quantum cryptography, so that is cryptography with a 30-year shelf life that's designed to survive through a quantum era. I don't make that definition. NIST, National Institute for Standard Technology, made that definition. European regulatory bodies come to the consensus that this encryption, and the best cryptographers in the world, including DJ Bernstein, agree it survives. So they're going to standardize that. And that's not necessarily putting me adversarial to foreign governments, because if, let's say, Japan is hit in an attack with encryption that is not surviving, and somebody record decrypts and dumps important data, let's say to Sony or Mitsubishi, right? And it hurts their intellectual property, their business, or the confidence in the company's stock, right? America will be suffering with it. If somebody uses that capability to stimulate capital flight, right? And the Nikkei 225 is dropping, well, S&P will drop with it. So it's kind of like if we either all rise together or we all fall together when it comes to encryption, because we require it for digital commerce. I don't think that it puts me adversarial. Now, yes, there are actors who like to inflict self-inflicted wounds, right? And, I think, I
think there's both people who want your tech and want you to go away at the same time. I think you're on the wrong side of multiple state actors in different dimensions.
And that's possible. One time I was in an office in Seattle, and there was a person from one of those countries, and they had like 30 employees in there, all from that country. No inclusion or equity, inclusion, and diversity. But, you don't see the regulator going after a Chinese office with 50 Chinese employees in Seattle, telling them you're not equity and inclusive. Guys just go under the radar, right? Mm-hmm. And we eventually came up to the conversation of hobbies. And I said, well, I enjoy firearms. And would you like to come to the range with me? Welcome to America. And, I think that we can give the tough guy speech, but being hard targets obviously helps, because like look at it like being a criminal. When they're going to go rob cars, they start with the unlocked doors first. So you want to make yourself a hard target. And I think that Americans have managed to avoid a lot of the shenanigans that they engage in other countries, is because we have the potential to be very violent people, which is a really good thing. I think that's something we should never surrender, because the moment we're perceived as pushovers, they're going to push us over immediately. The blood is in the water, and the rest of the world is circling the United States. And from my perspective, the greatest thing to ever happen to the world is the United States, right? So there is global commerce because of the United States. The end of colonialism, right? The end of imperialism is solely because of the United States. It ended it single-handedly. And also with the help of Russia, but the Soviet Union was a bit of an imperialistic power itself. So the United States ended colonialism. It ended imperialism, even though some of it was born out of it. But it essentially put an end to it for everyone and said, we're going to nuke you, we're going to hurt you if you continue this behavior. So I think that the reason the world developed in the last 20 years economically is only because of the existence of the United States, because it created certainty for everyone. And a multipolar world is more uncertainty and slower economic growth.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this. So can you go into that a little bit? What is the difference between a unipolar versus multipolar, and how is that good or bad?
So in international relations theory, there's a particular author called John Mearsheimer. Some of his stuff I don't really get into. Some of it's really data-driven and fascinating. And one of the things he did is he looked at the casualties in wars in history, right, and the sources of them. And one of the data-driven facts he came to was that when you want to look at mass population reduction events in war, right, like 60 million dead, they're always in situations where you have more than two great powers. So there is an unsophisticated part of the population who don't study this stuff, and they think that if you have China, Russia, and the U.S., it will check U.S. power, and that this is a good thing and the world will become more democratic or balanced. This is not true at all, and there is no empirical evidence of that. It's just somebody's idea. And ideas without empirical evidence or some kind of logical, coherent, persuasive argument are nonsense. So I don't listen to nonsense arguments, and you just roll over them like you should. Mm-hmm. So the 30 Years' War was multipolar. World War I was multipolar. World War II was multipolar. Multipolar means more than two. Mm-hmm. Guess what regime we're in? Multipolar. So if you look at the model, and I wrote this like 4 years ago, right? We're going to have 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 people dead in a short period of time soon. And I wrote that before the war in Ukraine. And I bet you, before the end of the war in Ukraine, we're going to be climbing those numbers back up there again as a leading indicator of a much larger casualty count coming.
I mean, we've already hit, depending on the numbers you believe, somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million of Ukrainians and Russians dead.
It's very possible we enter a world where we have 2 and 10% of the population killed in war over the next 15 years. So that's the implications of multipolarity. There is nothing peaceful about that regime. So the only way out is to assert U.S. hegemony, right, and make sure there are not two other powers to challenge it.
And how do we do that?
Well, we have to be on our game. We have to not be naive. We have to realize that as Americans, we have the right to survive whether or not we are good people. So when people say, well, the U.S. did this in Iraq and Vietnam, okay, those are horrible things, but we still have the right to survive. We have no sins to atone for. Brush it off. Let's go forward and focus on what's next. We don't have to suffer to make history right. That's not logical thinking, right? My expectation for American people is to not be emotional at all.
No atonement whatsoever.
Well, you can have atonement, but we still have the right to survive. Atonement cannot be defined as self-inflicted wounds, right, in order to make history right. That's ridiculous. There's no logic to that.
There's a lot of people who think self-flagellation is an important part of atonement.
Well, I don't think it is. Okay. I think that you can be analytical, and you can analytically, reflect on what you've done and realize that it's not good for you, not good for them. You have blowback consequences, things that hurt you. You get exclusion from society, so you lose rewards. Mm-hmm. I think that we can be logical and analytical. I think that being emotional adds no value to anyone on the topic. And if someone wants you to be emotional, then I will ask them, well, grow up. We're adults here. So I want you to mature beyond that and think more importantly about your survival. How do we survive? How does look at it like this also. In the United States, we have a lot of norms that are not universal. So the President Biden recently said that the only thing that makes an American is our passports. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. It's like Samuel Huntington said in Clash of Civilizations. We are civilization. The Constitution does not make America. You can delete all that stuff, and our socialization process, and if you guys don't know socialization theory, please read it. It's a field of science, and it's really well defined. Our socialization process on this continent that is unique created the people who created the Constitution. If you delete it and start it all over again, they'll do it over again. It's like an organic, natural process. If you delete 333 million American people right now and take 333 million people from another country, they will not replicate the process. There is no America without the people who live here. Now we have lots of immigrants, and they assimilate and they indulge in the socialization process, and they seek in-group rewards from a larger group that push them to adopt those norms, which are good for them, right? You have to have a center mass culture everybody wants to be a part of. And in pursuing that, people adopt norms that are good for commerce, especially because you can establish a high trust society, right? One of the special things about America that you see overseas, you don't see overseas in a lot of places, is that America is a high trust society. So I trust people to generally honor contracts, right? I trust people to mean well. In America, when someone doesn't mean well, or they're vicious, or they're racist, or they're cruel, the public is appalled, right? We're surprised. That's not a universal value system. In other parts of the world, they're like, what did you expect? That little tiny difference has huge implications on culture, right? A lot of the world see Americans as naive people, but romanticize it in a way, like they're innocent. That's because we trust strangers. And this little tiny fragile difference is the most important evolutionary innovation in human history. And the United States has to preserve that tiny little thing, even if it means war, because it's the greatest thing to ever happen to humanity.
Trust.
Instinct trust in strangers. That's what built our commerce. That's why we innovate so fast. If you go to a lot of other countries, particularly in Northeast Asia, trust is zero. It's like negative 50 even with your coworkers. Unless, like if you're in Korea, a lot of people, even Korean parliament members, are surrounded by their elementary school friends. So they stay in touch with their friends their entire life. I have Korean friends who meet alumni, as they call it, from elementary school. I don't know anyone from my elementary school. But to them, that's your circle of trust, because you can't trust anyone outside that tribe, right? Mm-hmm. America's tribe is a public society. I can go to a coffee shop, see someone reading a newspaper, and make a friend instantly. That's not a universal value system at all, right? The other interesting thing that makes Americans different is that although we fail at this, we strive for a society that seeks to judge people by things they can decide, not things they cannot decide. So there is some changes in American culture recently that remind me of the worser parts of the rest of the world, where we try to judge people by their ancestors or things or political affiliation or skin color, whether you're white, black, or whatever. No one should be judged by things they cannot decide as best we can, because it's the most dehumanizing thing you can do to someone. You're saying that you are things you have no control over. And I saw that a lot in Asia. And I think that it contributes to also the high suicide rate, because you're telling people there's no way out for you. There's nothing you can do, and you have to carry the sins of your fathers. It's a very low sophisticated, low intellectual value system that doesn't have sound reasoning. We're not allowed to say that.
Why does it persist? Why don't they change and evolve?
I have a cruel explanation. It's just low IQ thinking. That's it. And that's what I would say to the face of an activist. We're not allowed to say the R word anymore because, disparaging to people. So I just say low IQ. You're just a low IQ person, and that's why you think that way. I mean, honestly, it's such a hateful thing that it's very hard to have a mature conversation with a person like that and not just have rage towards them, because you realize they're on a warpath to hurt people. They're not there to heal. They're angry, right? And, I am an optimistic person, right?
Is that really intelligence, or is it just
it's not intelligence, but I wish to say that because I wish it's like a sophisticated way of hurting someone's feelings because you're angry.
Okay, well then what is it if it's not IQ?
I think one is there's an area of psychology that relates to identity, right? So people establish self-esteem by identity. And the thing is, identities can be malleable. It's very interesting. Like you look at the trans movement, they say identity is malleable. Well, it should also be malleable on whether you perceive yourself as a victim or not. I can perceive myself as a wrestler. I can perceive myself as a cybersecurity person. I can perceive myself as a patriot. And I can just choose which one I want to see myself as. And each one will have varying impacts on my identity and self-esteem. And I think that it's important to teach people that you can actually choose how you see yourself. But if you don't have the tools to do that, then people are vulnerable to being trapped like in a prison in their own mind.
I think it's worse than that. I don't even think they know that it is possible to think about anything other than they're currently thinking about.
Yes, that's right. They're in a prison.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the reasons why they behave that way. They're in a prison.
Occasionally I have conversations with somebody who on the surface seems relatively smart and no reason for them to not have better thinking. And they'll say something and I'm like, oh my God, you don't even know what a check is. Like they have no life experience. They've been so sheltered their entire life. I'm like, oh my God, it would take years to get you to the point where you're even useful to society.
Yes.
And so taking that person from there and saying, okay, and you can make yourself better and here's how, and you can learn these things. It's like, that is a long path to go down.
Yes.
Their parents did them a massive disservice. I don't know how that happened.
When I graduated high school, my graduation present that day was my underwear and stuff on the grass evicted. And what I've learned is at that time, I didn't have any of the values that would have led to me to become the person I am today. And some people just don't know what to do. They don't have the tools. They don't have the mentors. Humans also learn by copying other people. They don't have people's values to emulate. If you want to grow and you want to become someone you see on TV, you have to abandon everyone around you who is not like that. Because you're not going to learn anything from them. There is no thinking you can do to teach you who you have to become. You have to see other people do it and copy that. A lot of human intelligence comes from copying the behavior of other people that works for them and you emulate it for yourself. I think that it's important to be high open and malleable if you want to go from me sleeping on couches at 18 or being a private E1 in the Army to a person who's traveled the world and ran a high-frequency trading desk and been to the Pentagon and I was an intern for a former Secretary of State. In order to do that, I had to have people to learn from. In order to do that, I had to abandon everyone around me and go find someone else. And so one of the things I like to tell people is if you're not in a good place in life, you have some tough choices. And if you really, really want to become that lawyer or you want to become that person that you imagine, you've got to leave everyone around you. And that's cold, it's hard, it's heartless, it's mean. You can come back to them, but you've got to change the people around you. They say you become the 5 nearest. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can also know that if you don't have other people to learn from, you're never going to grow.
I mean, that's part of what this podcast is all about, is me learning constantly from my guests. But I do think that there is something to, so I agree and disagree. I agree because once upon a time, I was a very, very, very shallow person and was only concerned about getting sales to my consulting company, and that was it, right? Yep. I kind of ran my life like that for years, and it was horrible. I actually really didn't like myself. Coming out of it, I had a lot of amazing friends who I personally didn't consider as friends. I was just like, these are people I know and I'm trying to get contracts from or trying to work with or whatever. In hindsight, obviously, I made some incredible friends. And I actually went back and actually became friends with these people that I was friends with, as opposed to just, knowing them. I'm sure they considered me a friend, but it was not in my head as a friend. And I couldn't even really define it at the time, that's how bad it was. But now I look at those people and I'm like, yes, all of them are incredible, obviously. Otherwise I wouldn't have spent the time to get to know them. All of them have taught me a lot. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here doing these type of things. But at the same time, I learn a ton from the layman. I learned a ton from talking with people who have maybe no directly relevant life experience, but they drive a cab or whatever. One of the most interesting conversations I ever had was a guy talking about his upbringing and being a Muslim. And we didn't have a lot in common core value wise, I realized as we talked, but one thing he said is like, I'm like, what happens if you win $1 million? What does your tomorrow look like? He's like, I'd give it all away. He's like, it's a cancer. Having this money I know what it would do to me. I would become a terrible person. And that was really eye-opening to hear someone's perspective on that. He's like, I would find a way to get rid of it as quickly as I possibly could.
Okay, I agree with you. So it depends what you're trying to learn. I'll give you a more clear example.
If you're being precise, yes.
I'll give you a clear example. So when I was at that age of 18 and I was sleeping on couches and I had the offer to stay at this guy's house who had an apartment, we were young, right? And he also didn't have family and he had no furniture. And he used to tag and spray paint a lot on the internal wall. And he was like thinking that he's going to become successful as an artist. And he attributes a lot of life to mystery, things he cannot see, and luck. The reality is, in hindsight, after having studied economics and seen the world, the probability is against him, right? So first of all, there's a lot of people exactly like him. Differentiation is going to be very hard, right? And there's a lot more to success than simply being good at something. He has to be able to have street smarts. He has to be able to handle people in negotiations. He has to build a team. He has to be able to lead people to establish their trust. If you're a person who's low trust because you had a hard life, you're never going to be successful if you don't trust people.
Yeah, and your friends around you are probably not going to teach you much.
Yes. And if you have a hard time trusting people, it's going to be very hard for you to be successful. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting, That means that if you can't trust anyone, then you have to change the people around you. See, people who want to be successful try to become trusting people because there's a game theory example. So it's not prisoner's dilemma, it's called stag hunt, right? So in stag hunt, you have like a hare and you have a stag. You want to catch not the rabbit to eat, you want to get the bigger animal, let's say like a deer. To catch a deer, though, you might need someone else to help you. Maybe you need a spotter, right? And then you need to be shooting for it. Or you need someone to have the deer run to your direction so that you can shoot it, or however you want to frame it, track it, right?
Yeah.
You're more likely to catch bigger game working in teams. Well, no one's going to work with you if after you catch the deer, you kill them, or you don't share it. The next time around the game, no one's going to work with you. So if you want to have a lot in life, you have to be a person that is not only trying to be trustworthy, but people pick up by your body language that it's literally who you are. If you're socialized in an environment where no one trusts each other, your body language is going to tell people that you are a defector in games. So they're not going to work with you. When I work with people and I watch their behavior, and if I hear remarks about screwing people, or he deserves this, or it's all about me, I'm thinking, I'm not going to be your business partner. I will, at an arm's distance, use you like an asset and not really bring you in my circle. And when I'm done, I'm going to discard you because you're damaged and you cannot go far, right? So I think it's a saying about Africa. If you want to go far, you're going to walk with a group, And so I think that business is like that. And some people don't have the tool sets to attract people to trust them to build things. And also, when we look at examples of people who made it alone, trusting no one, if you have a more advanced education in economics and probability statistics, you realize that there's a thing called a survivorship bias. So a lot of people don't know what a survivorship bias is, and they take the wrong lessons from that success. So they'll look at Mark Zuckerberg, or they'll look at Elon Musk. And Elon Musk might be perceived by people as abrasive and aggressive, and they think, well, I can be successful if he can be like that. And I'll say, no, you can't. And I'll say, why not? I say, because you're not him. That's just it. Or, by probability statistics, he is 1 in a trillion, because it's not just the living, but it's over many lifetimes of that kind of rare example of a person. and you're trying to bet your success on being the most improbable statistical outlier, and that if you want to be very wealthy or you want to be very successful, why don't you take the path that has more statistical probability of being successful because there are more numbers of people who made it that way. Don't try to pick the path only one guy made it. That's like saying, if I want to be an Olympic athlete or I want to be a short track ice skater or an NFL, I'm going to take the largest number of NFL players and look at the one thing they have in common and try to copy that, replicate that strategy. I'm not going to find the one NFL player that's like nobody else and that made it and try to copy his strategy. It's just not good thinking. And a lot of people...
But isn't it better to strive for something above, and then if you miss, at least you're in the NFL?
I think you want to pick a strategy in game theory that puts you in the quadrant of more likely to be successful. Mm-hmm. You understand my point?
Yes.
You don't want to pick a strategy that is harder, right? So that's kind of my point. If I want to be a movie actor, I'm going to study all the movie actors, and I'm going to look for the largest average of them that made it and do that thing. I'm not going to go the rare example path, because then statistically my chances are lower. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the same thing when it comes to upward mobility as a person who was sleeping on couches at one point. When that guy was spray painting on the wall, he will look at the one example of someone who made it the hardest way. That's really stupid. Wouldn't you pick the example where the most amount of people made it and follow that one?
Well, maybe not stupid, but certainly naive.
Yeah. I would, if I want to be a pop music star, I would never follow like Kanye West's path, right? or even 50 Cent, right? He was shot a lot of times, or Eminem, right? These are statistical outliers. I would find the artists that had like a less eventful life with less risk and that also made it, and more people made it. That's a safer path, and you're still going to get there. And a lot of people, they have mysticism. They imagine stuff. They think it's ghost. They think it's karma. And those things might exist, but I kind of look at like quantum mechanics. I'll tie it to something funny.
Sure.
If you look for karma, like a quantum state, it'll go run from you. If you look for luck, it'll run from you. If you look for fate, you'll never have it. These things happen only when you're not looking for it. And so I always feel like, in a way, to be a little bit spiritual, I think you jinx yourself if you're looking for karma. Then you're going to be like my mother. You're going to be 65, working at Marshall's as a cashier and die of cancer and live a life unfulfilled. Because every day she woke up looking for fate and stuff. If you look for it, you're never going to get that shit. So if luck's going to happen, if fate's going to happen, it's because you didn't see it coming. So don't look for it. And instead just do the hard work and follow the hard path. And if those things come to you, fine. But if you look for it, you're going to be the other million people of dreams unfulfilled. That is my cold advice for people.
One of my favorite quotes was, if you have all the luck in the world, it doesn't matter how much skill you have. But if you have all the skill in the world and you don't have any luck, you're done. And so
there's a way. There is a catalyst you can introduce to get more luck, right? As we imagine. No, also being trustworthy.
Yeah, sure.
Trustworthiness attracts more people, which opens more paths, and it gives us more visibility to other people who have resources. People who have resources may not all be the most trustworthy people in the world, but you know what? They don't want more cooks in the kitchen. They want nothing but trustworthy people around them, no matter how untrustworthy they are. And so you can get very far in life working on yourself to remind yourself how important it is to be trustworthy. But one of my mentors once said to me, because I've gotten screwed a lot, right? And it hurts when you get screwed. It hurts when somebody is dishonest. And he said to me, if you go your whole life not trusting anyone, you might go your whole life and never get screwed, right? And if you go your life trusting people, you're going to get screwed. But at least you're going to live a life fulfilled with relationships, with memories, with laughter, right? Authenticness. And you have to choose what's more important to you. Do you want to live a life alone and die? Or do you want to live a life rich with memory? In which case you have to accept you're going to get screwed. I think as you get screwed more, you can develop tools and skills to reduce the chance of that happening, right? So we can say that's like street smarts, picking things up earlier. And also, like, as I try to mature, I learned that if you have someone untrustworthy in your orbit, it's not always the best strategy to cut them out. It's not always the best strategy to confront them. Maybe you shape the environment around them. Maybe you arm's distance them. Maybe you're super nice to them, but they don't know you don't trust them. Maybe you use them like a missile and send them in a direction. You just got to be aware of them and what they're good at and what they're not. But this is like, as you would mention, this is like later stage experience. People just starting out are not even at a cognitive faculty or experience level to even think about that stuff just yet. I also have one controversial opinion because this one gets under my skin.
You only have one? Okay.
I have one particular one. People say that if you have the chance to think about this stuff, it's because you have rich or because you have comfort, and people who are really busy and struggling in life can't think about these things. And that's nonsense. So in my case, even when I was homeless, sleeping on couches, and I was always thinking about trying to learn. When I was in the army and in the field and I had sand up my butt crack and I hadn't had a shower in a month and water with cocoa powder tastes like milk, I was thinking about this stuff. I don't think it has anything to do with income level. I don't think it has anything to do with resource scarcity. I think just some personalities are curious and driven. And unfortunately, I don't have enough of an expertise in neuroscience or psychology to know if that's a learnable thing or it's just on a distribution and just a certain percent of the population are like that. Here's the cool thing about thinking about that. I have no ego because of it. Like, I'm very lucky that I have my personality. And I sometimes feel sorry when I can see someone else and they're not very driven or they don't believe in themselves. It's like a 10-year path for them to change. And I have no control over that. There's nothing I can do, right? And that really bothers me. So in some way, I feel very blessed that I have a bunch of tools that I didn't decide.
I will say there definitely are two groups of people in my world. Some groups of people, I love them both. I love them both. But some groups of people, I'll have a conversation and with somebody and we're having a good conversation, and then they'll walk over, they're like, hey, what are you guys talking about? And I'll explain it's something about geopolitics or whatever, some technology thing or whatever it is, something interesting, gets us going, and they'll hear it and they're like, oh, sorry. And they'll turn around and walk away. And somebody's super interested and somebody couldn't get out of there fast enough to stop hearing this deep conversation. Yeah. And, I think it is a personality thing, and I don't know exactly what drives it, but, I don't think you can get them past that point at which it becomes interesting unless it becomes directly relatable to them, unless it's directly impacting them today.
So there's
like try to get people to understand, COVID or like viruses or something 5 years ago. Forget it. Right. Like it would have been impossible. And 2 years ago, that's all you wanted to talk about. So that's the switch. Like when it becomes personally relatable, then they're interested. Otherwise, not at all.
I can only make some guesses here. So some people have low self-esteem and they don't believe in themselves. So they just completely abandon the idea of trying to become powerful, right? It's just no longer a part of their mental DNA. I think that some people have high self-esteem, and so they're not afraid of anything, and they want to acquire knowledge and power. They want to be equipped for everything, and so they're unafraid. Some people, unfortunately, tie their self-esteem to how much they know or don't know, right? So maybe if you're at a coffee shop and someone never went to college, and if we start talking about, let's say, microeconomics or macroeconomics or the Heckscher-Ohlm theorem, and we start getting fancy trying to sound smart, shit that I don't even remember like from like 15 years ago. Well, I killed myself writing all these graphs out in graduate school. I can talk about them, and also informs my view of policy. These things are indefatigable. They're as constant as physics, and they can't be beaten. And, we start talking about that. Some people will feel instantly insecure. And I'm like, why are you insecure? Like, I like you no matter what. I don't really value that knowledge. It's just a tool for me to get shit I want. Some people want to acquire knowledge so they can be better than other people. And I think that's like a pathetic way to live your life.
Yeah, I agree.
Because it's like I always tell them, what did you actually gain? Oh, so you beat up a bunch of people emotionally. You spend your whole life trying to prove yourself to yourself. Like, and then, that's it. You're basically spending 50 years of your life struggling with something you should have resolved in a high school sport before 18.
So I would say, okay, there's one different variant of that happens to me all the time. I'll be at a party or something. I'll be talking to somebody and they'll say, I'm really into X, whatever the thing is, right? Basket weaving or whatever, something random, whatever it is. And invariably, it's something kind of close. I don't know why this always happens. It's something kind of close to something I know. Not like I study it. I just happen to know a lot of things around it. And I'm like, oh, well, do you know this about this and blah, blah, blah. And I'm genuinely excited to hear about something that they're excited about. You know, let's talk about it. Let's have that kind of conversation. And I'd say better than 95% of the time, they don't know anything about the topic, like at all.
The Dunning-Kruger effect.
Right. They're super into it. They know nothing. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, and they're like, you know a lot about this. I'm like, yeah, okay, anyway. I can sit here talking about it all the time, but you're not giving anything back, so maybe we should probably change the topic.
Yeah, I think the first indicator of someone not understanding something is when they confidently come in and say they understand it. That sounds like cool wisdom thing to say, but there's actually a dark side of that. They really don't. Like, in South Korea, even a lot of taxi drivers have 4-year degrees because they have so many educated people. There is just nowhere to go.
That's crazy.
And
what a waste.
South Korean households spend 30% of their income on after-school education. Can you imagine what America would be like if we had that? Our GDP would be like 50 trillion. We'd have nuclear fusion by now. What a waste, right? And they're not suicidal and depressed because of that. They are suicidal and depressed because they have 50 million people in a tiny little place and not enough opportunity. The only reason South Koreans don't rule the world is because of a language barrier and because they're not only 50 million of them. It's a miraculous society. If America had the same GDP growth as South Korea from 1962 to 2021, last time I calculated, American income would be $70 million per household. That's how fast they grew. And that is only because of one thing in particular. They obsess on education. I have a Korean friend. And see, Americans make excuses, say, I don't have money. I have a Korean friend who was a national champion pianist. Do you know how she learned to play the piano? She didn't have one. She drew on a piece of paper, the piano, learned the sounds, and made the sounds to herself. And some Americans will say that's too extreme. You know what? Then I don't have empathy for what happens to you because you're just spoiled. I don't think we should try to have things easier. I think we should say that's a challenge. That's exciting. I want to do it the hardest way because it's going to be fun and I'm going to get a lot of dopamine bursts from the edge of how hard it is. It feels good. It's like a wrestler, It feels good to almost get hurt to win. It's like somebody who likes spicy food. I always tell people, if I'm not crying, it's not spicy enough. Sometimes you like a little bit of that threat. It feels exciting. You're alive. And you want that kind of challenge. And South Koreans, they love spicy food. Maybe there's something to it. They're really adept to wanting that rush from something that is so hard, it's almost painful. When I was in graduate school in Korea, I was almost the only white kid in all my classes. And they do study harder, and they are more serious people. There was another mentor of mine who used to work for our intelligence community, and they made a comment to me that Americans are no longer serious people. What is a serious person? Someone who says, we're going to have $70 million per household in 15 years, and they are a fucking monster about it. And they're not saying it to feel good about themselves. They're not saying it to impress their friends. In fact, everybody became a noisy object except that goal. That's a serious person. If the United States says we want to remain as hegemon, we don't want China to tell us what to do, then we're going to have a 10-year plan to flatten their GDP. We're going to look for innovative ideas to make sure the U.S. stays ahead, and we're not going to stop till we have it. And this is not fun. This is like a life or death, like 50 Cent, ride or die trying. If we're not ride or die trying, we're not serious people. And South Koreans are serious people. So my friends tell me, because I lived there 10 years, that I kind of diverged a little bit from Western culture, right? Because I have that kind of like 50 Cent, that ride or die, kind of die trying mentality. If you tell me that we're going to overthrow the North Korean regime tomorrow, I'm going to show up at your house, knocking on your door saying, okay, so what's the plan? I think for the average person, that's very scary. Well, in I just call that being a serious person. Those are my thoughts on that. I mean, I think South Korea is a very fascinating place. I loved it. I didn't have any foreign friends for a long time. I speak Korean, read and write, and it has drawbacks like everywhere. But living in South Korea 10 years shaped my life. And another comment would be very interesting. That was my first time as a white person to experience racism. And I'll give it, and it hurts. You know, it really hurts. One time I had a job for the Korean government. I worked for the Korea Energy Economic Institute, 한국 에너지 영재 경주원. That's the Korean for it. So I was like the only American to ever work for their equivalent of the Department of Energy Information Agency. And I was the only white guy in this whole building of these PhDs. And I had an advanced degree of master's. So I was punching above my weight with a master's, everyone that has a PhD. Korea has more PhDs, I think, than America has plumbers. And this one gentleman who went to Ohio State University with a PhD said the only reason you got this job is because the boss thinks that something special about Americans and he has pity on you.
Wow.
And first of all, he's educated in the United States. And first of all, because he spoke English like me, I thought that he would share my values. That was also an interesting lesson for me. People who speak English or another language as a second language don't have any feeling usually for the words they say. So he had no empathy speaking English. Now, would he have said that to me in Korean? No, because there would have been shame on him and guilt. Because English is not his first language, he has no feeling. That's another interesting point in foreign policy when it comes to China. When we speak to a Chinese person in CCP, nothing they say is authentic because it's in a language they don't have any feeling for. And so when I talk to people...
Well, surely they have some feeling. I mean, they have to have some sense that they're going to be
cognitively. I think cognitively there's a huge gap in like the part of the brain that processes it, not the same part.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, that's my assumption.
Well...
Is it easier to lie in a second language or your native language? I think people would say probably the second language.
Yeah, maybe. Because you're kind of bumbling around the language anyway.
You don't really feel it. You don't necessarily understand it, even if you know the words. Yeah.
This could be what this word means. I don't know.
Well, you know, and then language, no language translates perfectly. Like there's an expression in Korean, children say it all the time. They say, "Ah, 죽겠다." It means I want to die. So if you translate it directly, you think all Korean children are suicidal. But in Korean culture, it means like...
Die laughing?
No, it means this sucks. So like you can imagine then if an American says to a Korean person, I want to die, they might not process it in Korean the same way because in Korean, there's a different meaning even in their language.
Yeah, sure.
So things get messy really quick. And so when you are in diplomacy and you're engaging people from other countries, you may not be getting the context might be lost a lot. So
back to what you think people should be like when they're overseas. I mean, this is a global society now. In a handful of hours, I could be in nearly every country in the world that I want to be in, and knowing myself, I could probably be in any country I want to be in. And so then what? How should I act? I don't know how to tell other people to act. I'll tell what worked for me. So that's like telling somebody, if you get your first job at an investment bank, how do you act? Well, I don't know. It depends on your skills, your personality. You know, it's like somebody with charisma. They can say edgy things that would upset people, but if they have charisma, suddenly everybody likes them. So it's really hard to give people specific advice because it really depends on you and your skill set. So I'll tell you me. I think the characteristics people define me by is I wear everything on my sleeve. I'm genuine and I mean well. Even if I'm offensive, I mean well. And you can persuade me with analytical reasoning. No emotion. If you tell me it hurts someone's feelings, I will say, well, then it's your responsibility to develop yourself. That's not my problem. Left to your own devices, figure it out. And if you can't, then ask me for help. But if you're waffling in between it and not communicating clearly, I got nothing for you. So that's me, right? So in Korea, I was like that.
And I had heated arguments with national security advisors who are my professors. One of the Korea's economic minister was my economic professor. And I didn't pull any punches. You know, one time this person said to me, Americans are like babies because when I went to Washington, D.C., you have these huge monuments. Like, you're so proud of yourselves of so little. And I said, you know, I have a different way of looking at it. Her husband worked for the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I said, I said, you know, it took you 10,000 years to get to what America did in a couple hundred. I think that you're just slow. And then she looked shattered, you know, upset. And I said, listen, don't dish it out if you can't take it. Do I mean what I just said? No. But I'm going to bite you back. And don't come at me with this anti-Americanism. And then we were friends and we would go have lunch, and she was like, thought more carefully. And I made a lot of friends. I was invited to Korean Parliament. I friended some very high-level people. I have a friend on Facebook who became an assemblyman, and he helped take down the last president and put her in prison. Those are my friends. And that's because my nickname was the American. I just was me. There was one personality of Americans I hate. When they go overseas and they say, oh, I'm not like the other Americans. What a wimp. You know, what a wimp. You're pathetic. You know, and they would say like, well, I don't know, like the Iraq war is horrible and I'm not like them. You're like, you're such a wimp. How about the Iraq war is horrible and I love America, and you can be both? Don't be a wimp. Just own it, you know, and be proud. You don't have to be proud of things you don't like about America, but then you don't know who you are. They say, well, what is American? Well, obviously, I can't hold my tongue. I like to be corrected. I like to debate. I like to learn. And I place these things before your feelings. That's our society. We have a public debate, civil society. We all want to grow. We're a big community. And that's what makes me American. And I shamelessly believe the liberal world order is best for everyone, even in countries that don't want it, where you have a bunch of old men who hate it. Well, I don't really have empathy for them.
To be clear, when you say liberal in this context, you mean
international liberalism, not American left and right liberalism.
Yeah, les libertés.
So free speech. Yeah. Generally, you want equality. You want the ability for women to work in the workplace. I just
wanted to clarify that.
In the most rough definition.
Because a lot of people don't know what that classical liberal...
The world the United States built during the Cold War and led to the demise of Soviet Union. And those values that triumphed, we say the liberal order, that's what it is, right? It's Western values.
Left would call that like alt-right.
Or the left would call that, or the far left would call that imperialism or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, but
I call that just modernization.
It has a weird connotation.
Well, the contrapositive of their definition of imperialism is basically then a bunch of old men who in the Taliban keep their women in their apartments and don't let them go outside. And so if you try to stop that, they call that imperialism. Well, if that's what it is, I'm really proud to be an imperialist then.
And have modern slavery.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people still have to be liberated in the world. You know, if the people who represent that country and they say they don't like America, they don't like the West, I promise you they're in power in that country. I promise you they are oppressing people. And look at China. They have like 30 ethnic groups, right? And they say they don't want the West. You know what? I'd like to interview the other 29 ethnic groups and see if they share your opinion. But the only way that would work is if they have no accountability for what they say.
Right. If you can get them out of the country first.
That's a dangerous thing in the United States. I think there is
and their family.
A thin line, but to some degree, I think we should have no accountability for what we say. And I'll tell you why. The way you change someone is by bringing them into your orbit, introducing that risk to you, and placing that greater good before yourself. We have to be people willing to get hurt. We have to accept getting hurt. And so in my own company that I run, I've had people of every political spectrum. I will hire a communist because I know in 2 years he's going to become more moderated through the experiences he has with the good people who don't share his values. He will grow out of it. I will bring in every kind. If you want to change someone, bring them into your heart. So we have to be people in some way that are not punishing people for everything we say and thinking non-emotionally about, instead of punishment, how do I change that person? And Americans have lost sight of that. We want to hurt people. We want to imprison them rather than change them. To that, the left is right. But it's more complicated than that. We don't want to throw people in prison. We want to change them. Of course, we want to minimize the damage people can do to others. But we do have this culture. It's very different from Korea, where when we see a bad guy, we want to like beat them and hang them. In Korea, do you know what they say? What happened to them? Where were their parents? I mean, it always comes down to the parents, right? Every time. And I do find that a lot of American problems come from American parenting just sucks. You know, a lot of American parents think that being a parent means being in the room with your son or daughter. That's not a parent. Parent is having conversations with them, playing video games with them, learning with them, asking them questions to probe them. A parent has to be a professor for their kids all the time and also growing. And if you're not that, you're not a good parent. Fuck you.
So what do we do? I mean, you said we should be this way, should be that way. Is that a policy that needs to be created? Like what?
Well, this is the funny thing about
what is the American government to do if they take this seriously? Like, let's say the next president comes in, he sees his podcast, he's like, I need to do these 3 things or whatever. Well, what are the 3 things?
I'm not sure that we need government micromanaging anybody, right? I'm speaking more along cultural lines, right?
Well, how do we get more culture along those lines?
Leading by example, of course, is one. That's really hard for politicians to do, right?
I mean, we can have these conversations and, you know, countless people will see it, but that doesn't mean they're going to do it.
Yeah. I think that part of the challenge is first recognizing the problem and creating that conversation. It has to be a conversation, right? So, you know, with the woke movement or whatever, it's a conversation. Whether you agree with it or not, it's a conversation. This is the American way. Things become a conversation. So if we want to talk about parenting in the United States, which would be a great conversation, how do we parent our children? Then we make this a public forum discussion. You know, if I were running for president, I think I wouldn't get elected if I did. It's not going to help me, right? But maybe I want to say, let's have a conversation about parenting. You know, we have a conversation nowadays about autism. It's a movement to discuss it, recognize it, appreciate it. I'm divergent, right? We can also have a conversation about parenting. So we don't have to talk about whether you punish or reward kids and all these things. These are tactics. I think the most basic thing we get wrong with parenting, and I may prove to be a failure parent, I hope not, is just engaging the child and being a part of their life. Don't withdraw yourself. Don't be uninterested in their things. Be interested. You know, like I think it's very important to show interest in children, interest about being part of their life. And I also think that, you know, that's important because that's an investment in the future. One of the things that does disappoint me, I think for a lot of people, it's a big difference in Asian culture, is in Korea, people look at children as an investment in their tribe and their society. And I noticed in the United States, not all people, but there's a few people who get on a lot of podcasts and everything is about how they don't want children or they don't want to be involved in children. They don't like them. And that's something about, and that we have to become a society where
who likes children? They're terrible.
we just like.
Have you met one?
The only purpose of life is to make yourself happy, and I think that that's nonsense, right?
No, but children are horrible. I'm putting that on the record right now.
No, they're amazing, and they're
amazing. In the end, yeah.
They're amazing. They're curious.
Yeah, they are. It's pretty interesting. I would say it's been a massive growing experience for me to watch them learn.
I think that
like mini robots, and the stimulus you give them really changes the output.
I think children are the preservation of our society. And remember the inklings I told you, that the high trust society and these tiny little beautiful things that are very rare, right? Teaching and educating our children continue that. And me, I'm idealistic on that way. And I have a lot of you should do this and do that. And I understand people won't. And some of it's just my personal character. Now, so do I look down on somebody who has a child and is uninterested? Yeah, I know I'm a human being. I have emotions, right? And I also think about not my country, but civilization. I don't call it the USA. I call it the American civilization. We are in glue of a people who are unique, and no one is like us in the world. And those differences are beautiful, and we should be unashamed. That's why I joke and say we're not one people of the world. We are very different in a lot of ways. Now, we have a lot in common, and we can all get along and love each other. But we have differences, and those differences are attitudes towards trust, attitudes towards public society, attitudes if it's appropriate to make a conversation with a stranger at Starbucks on a football game. In a lot of countries, that's not appropriate. These little things make characteristics that have a lot of like a butterfly effect on everything. You know, it also, like we spend 80% of our lives in the workplace, right? So then the most important thing you can do in your entire life is work somewhere you want to. That's your life. And I like work. I like to solve problems. I like to build things. I think there are a lot of people who have jobs they don't like. And I do think it's very interesting because maybe automation will help solve them or crush it.
AI in general, right? So you were at one point writing something, I read your blog post about low self-esteem way of thinking about, I guess, culture in general. Like we should be punished with this flagellation thing we were talking about earlier. We have terrible things in our history. Is that really a self-esteem thing? Can you get people out of that? Is that...
Look, we have to be logical people and unemotional people, and that means consistent, right? So I like when I engage someone who talks about climate change, I say you're a person of science. Then you're going to be a person of science about guns. You're going to be a person no emotion. You're going to look at data only in statistical curves, Gaussian distributions. No emotion here, no optics, no feelings, right? You can't choose to be scientific one way and not another. We either are a people of science or we are not, right? It's not like you don't get to choose. Of course, a lot of those people, you realize they're full of shit about being people of science.
It's inconvenient.
And I would like for us to be truly people of science. And, we can be emotional, but we have to compartmentalize it and say, okay, I want to be data-driven on this topic. And, lots of times they'll be data-driven and they come to the conclusion they want and they write a paper and publish it. They're like, well, you got a lot of assumptions there, so let's have a conversation about that in good faith. And then you will learn that, no matter the political side, you get shut down really quick. And I think that that's unfortunate.
It's funny. I just saw a piece of legislation go by my screen the other day, and it was everyone was getting all hyped up about it. I'm not going to get into it today, but I think it'll be deserved at some other point. But I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. Everyone's takes. I'm reading all their takes, and then I go read the legislation. It doesn't say anything close to what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I think people are unwilling to do that next step, that one last thing of actually checking the source and making sure that it is true and that this is what's happening. And one can only conclude either people are incredibly ignorant or state-sponsored.
Well, I'm guilty of that sometimes too, because I'm a human being and I'm emotional.
Well, I don't.
I think
I thought you want to be a man of science.
Yeah, well, it's something you strive for. It's not something you always live up to, right? Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. If someone comes to me and says that, hey, this is not what it is, I should have no emotion, even if the information you're telling me doesn't make the world a better place. There are things more important than making the world a better place. You know what one of those is? The truth. Because I think the truth is more important than making the world a better place. And the reason I believe that is if we lose truth, we're going to lose trust, right? And if we lose trust, we're going to slow innovation. We're going to stop sharing information. We're not going to work together. And then the whole show is off of the development of humanity.
I thought for sure you're going to say survival.
Our survival, I think, like
trust is good, but I would actually prefer to survive than have trust.
I'm of this camp where I don't believe we should reduce ourselves to living in eco-villages and locally. That to me sounds the most miserable life in the world. I want to see the stars. In third grade, I wrote a letter to NASA, and I said, I want to leave. I want to go to space. I want to see what's there, right? And I think it would be great if we want to see what's there, and we prioritize that ahead of our well-being. I'm willing to risk my life for it, so why aren't you? But it's personality difference, right? It kind of reminds me of the hunter-farmer hypothesis. So it's supposed to explain ADHD. ADHD is correlated to a gene called DRD4-7RL. And they call that the wanderer gene, right? So I think that I have another hypothesis on top of that. Totally no facts about this, just my guess.
I thought you were a man of science. What happened?
Well, that's the thing about hypothesis, right? Is that you're not committing to it as fact. You're saying this is a possibility, sure. Right?
Yeah.
I'm going to make you a wager that America has more people with ADHD than anywhere else in the world. Because if
diagnosed, or you mean if
in general,
if that's a real thing and we could
if it's a real thing, I bet you we have the most. because if it's really a wanderer gene, it's we do notice it has some properties, right? So thrill seeking, not such great risk management skills, willing to do dangerous things, because the idea is that you don't produce enough dopamine. So to catch up, you need a rush. People who have ADHD tend to be prone to sex addiction, other addiction, right? They are thrill seekers. And, so they are those horrible colonists we heard about who want to go see dangerous shit and want to go over the ocean and maybe die. And I think that also for immigrants, right? Immigrant is a very interesting person because they're leaving everything they know for something new. They're a wanderer. America is the land of immigrants. I think that's a beautiful thing. They're wanderers. Because everyone here wandered here except for Native Americans, who actually did wander here in history, right? A lot of Europe is stationary. They've been there forever. The ones who left, maybe they're all the wanderers. In Asia and everywhere else, the wanderers. Maybe everyone here of every ethnic group is a tribe because we're all wanderers. And we have nothing in common with those people back home, except how we look, which is nonsense. Maybe that people from Africa who move to Europe are wanderers. Those who stay home are not. So their tribe is actually those with ADHD. I like people who have ADHD. I think it's beautiful. I don't think it's a disorder. It comes with a lot of challenges, but I love their personalities. I like their enthusiasm. I like that if I tell them we're going to go to an all-Latin club and we're the only white people there, they're like, let's go. They have a fearlessness about them. And I think, but I also understand people who have ADHD are, at least in measured number, a smaller minority. So what if this push to space, this push for adventure is a super minority of the population?
Why can't that be enculturated, though? Why can't it just be, yes, they're once upon a time that's true, but then their descendants, whether that's true or not, they're like, oh, well, mom's like this, I guess I'll go too. And, and then their grandkids are like, well, grandpa, everyone seems to be like this around me and I'll just do it too. And
I don't have answers. These are hypotheses, right? Yeah. So I also heard that, I heard this idea that ADHD can also look a lot like trauma. So if you have childhood trauma, your behaviors can have on a Venn diagram a lot of overlap from somebody who's diagnosed ADHD. And what I do know about the science is none of it's really in yet. That maybe a lot of ADHD is just childhood trauma. In which case, maybe childhood trauma is necessary to have the Elon Musks or to have, the Mayflower, or to have people who seek unknown lands, people who want to go into the danger in the dark. And I think of those people romantically. I think for most people, like the hunter or farmer, but it doesn't mean you're a farmer. It just means like a personality type, right? In a farm, at least let's say in a rice farm, you have to be very cooperative. You cannot be rambunctious. You cannot be a wanderer. You have to work for the group. You have to work together. And that's how you survive, right? And for people with ADHD, the idea as a hunter is that think of them in a tree in a jungle alone. And they're highly vigilant, highly focused, agitated all the time. And that's how you survive, like a person with ADHD. Those are my favorite type. I say those are my tribe. And when I meet someone and I see a couple of symptoms of ADHD, I just ask, do you have ADHD? And they'll say, no. Do you know what that is? And I say, well, go take a look at it and you might suddenly find a lot of solace in learning who you are. And they come back to me, this happens. Holy cow. And I'm like, so you're found now. There is nothing wrong with you. And they're like, I had problems in my marriage. I had problems with friends. I said, nothing wrong with you. Just be around other people who have ADHD. And then you will realize all of your behaviors are exactly like theirs. And you don't have to wrestle with people anymore. This is your tribe. You're saved now. You're home.
I got a question for you. What do you think about, and I feel like I already know the answer to this, but I'm really curious to hear what you say about sociopathy. So a sociopath just kind of cruises by. Are you going to be friends with this person? Are you going to treat them like the missile and point them at stuff? Are you going to just pass on by?
I don't like, everything is context dependent, right?
Sure.
So I'm a high open person. I lived in Korea. I had dinner one time with North Korean defectors and a former North Korean soldier. I will walk into any kind of environment and be open and listen. So if I meet a sociopath or even a psychopath, I will bring them into my heart and listen. I will introduce the danger to myself and I will see what's there. And that's not easy for everyone. Of course, I have biases. I think that the world would be a better place if we just took that risk. I think the tragedy is people are afraid of that risk. And I think that as long as you know you're, like they say in the military, your left and right limits on the range so you don't shoot the other person, then you should be okay. You have some boundaries. I'll do it. And I've hired sociopaths. I hired someone who told me they were a sociopath. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't mind that because at least you're aware of it. You're honest with me. So let's give you a try. And it didn't work out. But there are ones who it does work out, So I learned some lessons,
Out of curiosity, anything related to the sociopathy or something else?
One of the things I would advise if a person really seeks counseling and they're a sociopath, the first piece of advice I would have you is don't open up to them a lot because everything you say will become a tool for them, right? They're optimized machines. So you got to keep a distance. If he's a great coder and he's a sociopath and he goes to counseling for it, don't be up Friday night 3 hours drinking with him. It's not going to work out well for you.
See, I've had a lot of sociopath friends, a lot, so a shockingly large amount. And it took me, I started noticing it pretty early in life, so I had a bit of an eye for it. And so I could pick them out of the crowd. I'm like, oh, okay, yep, you. And occasionally I'd even out them. I'm like, you're a sociopath. They're like, I'm a what? They'd never even heard the word before. I'm like, you have no emotion towards anybody. You have no empathy. And he's like, oh, yeah, that's me. Totally. I have no empathy. I'm like, yeah, see, that's what the word means. I'm like, oh, interesting. So I'm probably not exaggerating here, but I don't know the real numbers. Guess somewhere between 20 and 30, somewhere in that range, that I could point to and say, yep, you are. And I learned a couple things. One is they're basically exactly like normal people in every single way, except for that one thing. So in a way, they're actually easier to deal with because they don't have empathy, and that they don't have empathy, and nothing they're doing is driven by empathy. And so that actually makes it simpler to understand what's going on when they do things. It's easier to analyze what they're up to.
I suppose it's a spectrum, right? So I understand one of the challenges with sociopaths, I think this is the single greatest risk, okay, is that, and I'm not a psychiatrist, but I did read, okay? So what I understand is that they have a real problem with consequence modeling. So that's obviously hazardous to business, right?
Sure.
So if they do engage in a behavior, and then afterward you're like, what the hell? Well, now I've got to fire them, or now I don't trust them, right? And you will go to them and say, are you stupid? Like, why are you engaging in behavior that is not beneficial to you, right? You don't make sense. You should be calculating if you're really a sociopath, as you imagine, and all of your behavior should be engineered perfectly to get what you want. Now, unless they don't know what they want, then it's a really dangerous situation, right? So if you come to me and you say you're a sociopath and I want to be rich, I love you. But here's my thing about that. Don't deviate from that. Don't let emotions into it. And don't lie to yourself. Because if it's like ego you're seeking, you want to prove that you're smarter than me, well, now you're lying to me. You said you want to be rich. You didn't say you want to feel good about yourself. They don't go together. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have also learned about people who are wealthy is that they're very consistent about what they want, right? That's very important. And if you say you want to be rich, but you also want to like yourself, I got bad news for you. They generally don't mix. Liking yourself is what happens after you succeed, not in the process of trying to assert it. If I have someone come in my company and they want to prove to themselves that they're great, I'm like, you know what? Do that on your own time. You're here to make money or to accomplish this goal. And if you want to like yourself, when you go home, then you do that. You're not here to build your self-esteem in a way that gets in the way of the goal. If we have to go before a customer, right, and the customer tells us they're the smartest people in the world, and you don't agree with it, you're going to tell them you're the smartest people in the world. And you're going to place making money before your emotions and your ego. And
I thought you valued truth above all else. What happened?
Well, you're right. Life is complicated, isn't it? Right?
Yes.
So if you really say you want something, then you've got to stick to it. And I find that if a sociopath has an ego, that's a time bomb because you're going to have an expectation that they're going to be analytical like you and calculating like you, and you're going to learn that they're not. They are self-inflicted, wound-prone people constantly. So my rule is
I've
this.
not found that.
I have.
Interesting.
I ran a high-frequency trading desk, and there was this one gaming engineer, which can be fantastic engineers because they have to have competence in a little bit of physics, they usually have a wide range of ability as an engineer. And one time I put M&Ms on the table, right? And he didn't cut the line. He cut the line and tilted it to have a little bit more than everyone else. Number one, he's telegraphing to me that he only can be happy if he's having more than the person next to them. He's not thinking about how we're going to make $10 million. He's thinking whether he makes 100,000, you make 103. So he's game theoretically like low intelligence, right? And so that's the one behavior he demonstrated, you know. So maybe I just have too high of a standard for people, right? So I'm thinking about we're going to make $10 million and you're just all noisy objects in my way. I mean, I share some of those sociopathic behaviors, I guess, but I'm really easy to work with. I'll tell you, I want to make 10 million, and I don't care if you smell. I don't care if your breath stinks. I don't care if you think you're smarter than me. I don't care what you tell my boss, as long as I'm going to get the 10 million and I'm out. But most people can't do that. They have emotions. They have feelings. They don't like if someone else comes in late. And I'm like, you're such an idiot. Who cares about any of these emotional things? There is only the object that is the goal, and everything else is noise in between. But a lot of people aren't able to do that.
You still have to give them a birthday cake. I mean...
Yeah, well, that depends.
What about, okay, so, well, actually, one quick point before we jump. The one thing I have found that does work with sociopaths is getting your interests in alignment. So if you both have the same goal, it almost doesn't matter how bad they are, because you're both fighting for the same thing. So but as you said, if they lie to you or themselves, that's a whole other ballgame.
I have a couple of things I'd like to look for in people. Very high self-esteem. To me, one of the measures of high self-esteem is that they don't care if they're wrong. Right? There's no feeling about that. There's, I'm just wrong.
Yep.
And that's number one. They're not trying to prove themselves at the expense of other people. They're just proving it to themselves. And if you do it in a vacuum alone, in a physics vacuum, that's great. That's fine. It's up to you. You want to be better tomorrow than yesterday, you do that on your own time. If you come to the office trying to compete with me or compete with other people, your career is short-lived here. Right? And it's just because I don't have time for that stuff. None of us do. We got past that after high school. Grow up.
So what about corporate culture? Is it just no room for it?
What is corporate culture exactly? I've never been in a big company, so I was for 45 days. I have a good story about that.
45 days.
I was. It was amazing 45 days.
Tell me.
Okay, so I was in South Korea, and which is a place I love, and I got a job after the Energy Economic Institute. I had a 1-year contract, and after that I was out. Of course, it was pretty obvious I was going to be out having a PhD telling me that only I was there because of my skin color, right? So there was some forces working against having the one foreigner there who, they didn't like or whatever. It just didn't work out. I don't know the truth. And by the way, I will say that one of the effects of experiencing that is having judged you by your skin color and you're a minority like I was there. I have no power, right? So there's an argument that to be racist, you have to have power. Well, if you're white in Korea, you have no power. If the police show up and there is a fight, you're going to jail. It doesn't matter the truth because you're not from there. So you have no power in Korea if you're foreign of any color other than Korean, or same in China too, right? Or Singapore for that matter, or Japan. And so I had no power. And the problem is once you experience one stint of racism, you kind of start to see it everywhere, even if it's not true and your mind is in a bad space. So for me, when I returned to America, I was very empathetic to people who tell me you experience racism. Because if you have one bad event at a job one day, one time on a break, it does scar you for the rest of your life. And I don't care how strong you are. Nobody is stronger than, nobody is so strong that they can just overpower the limits of their own psychology. We all have fragility when it comes to having our mind in a bad place. That's why you have, veterans and all kinds of people who commit suicide like 7 a day. No one is above it. And if some tough guy says he's above it, he has the Dunning-Kruger effect, probably low IQ, and probably such an idiot he can't even see himself. Sorry, it's just true. If you think that's you, you're an idiot. Not you, but the audience or anyone else. We all know this, right? And so anyway, when I left that institute, I went to work at a German joint venture, German-run joint venture. I won't name the solar company. And they had a large capacity solar manufacturing plants in South Korea, and globally recognized large capacity plant. And I worked in the head office. I was going to do sales, okay? Because there are not a lot of Americans in Korea, and I would do international sales. It's a good fit. And I used to participate in the American Chamber of Commerce, and I met the chairman of a really famous private equity fund there, and he was tied to like the LG family. And he's a powerful dude, okay? And almost frightening, and I just knew him a little bit. And I got that solar job, and I had a call from his office asking me for a quote for 150 megawatts in 2011. Do you know what that was? It was like $3 a watt. It was a $150 million order. That company sells 6 megawatts a year. I didn't know that. I didn't know anything, right? Mm-hmm. So I went to the head of sale and I said, I need a quote for 150 megawatts. And he looked at me. He said, what are you talking about? I said, I got a phone call from these, I named the credentials. And he realized it's like Chable, like people like kind of at the level of Samsung family. I just got lucky, okay? And he says, I'm not helping you. I was like, okay. So I went to the German side. He was Korean. I went to the German side. And I went to the CFO and I said, he said he won't help me on this deal. And she said, do you know how much money that is? I don't know. She said, 150. She said, he only sells 6 megawatt a year. You just threatened his entire career. And I was like, well, okay, so I have an idea. I'm a cooperative person. And I went to him and I said, can we chat in private? Because he's like looking angry. He's emotional. He's like an idiot, you know? And I'm thinking I'm going to retire after this and go travel. You know, I'm going to make like a 1% commission, you know, 1.5 million. We'll cut it half. This is amazing. So I went to him and I was like, can we talk in private? And I said, listen, I only got this job, but I'm going to talk with you. I don't give a shit about the titles and all this. This is a waste of my time. We're about to make $3 million and I'm going to get half and you're going to get half and nothing else matters in life. Not your job, not your title, not your career, not the CEO, nothing. We're going to be rich, like two bank robbers. Let's work together. I got fired a week later. What a wimp. He cares about emotion. He cares about stability, his title, all useless things. He's about to make 1.5 million. He can get the best healthcare in the world. His kids can go to Harvard, and he has other priorities in life. I have no understanding of a person like that.
I'm sure the board would be furious to find that out.
Oh, it got worse, better and worse. So that CEO almost went to jail, who was German, because they were selling solar panels back to Germany below the price of the parent company, because they were a joint venture in Germany. And the Germans were furious. Wait a minute, you're using our technology and you have a rogue assembly line that you're underpricing, coming back to our country and selling. And a German did it to Germans. And that was one of the things I learned as an American. I idolized Germans as these like engineers are super honest, total crap. You know, they have just as many frauds as anybody else, and liars and criminals and cheats. This notion that Germans are inherently honest is like, it's like a racist stereotype. It's not. They're just people like everybody else. And there's nothing inherently honorable about the culture any more than anywhere else. And that's what I learned, you know. And I had another German business partner too, and he was capable of lying and cheating and all that stuff. So one of the things I learned is stereotypes are very bad also because they can walk you into a lot of assumptions that hurt you, you know. And so not only are stereotypes bad for racism, they're also bad for your risk management. And avoiding harm. If you project good onto people because you have a national stereotype towards people, you're going to get hurt. And so the Germans came to Korea, and the CFO came from the U.S. branch. They had a huge manufacturing here. They did a deal with the U.S. government. And they called me up, and the CFO called me up. And he said, I want to talk with you. And I said, are you offering me $3 million? And he said, no, I want to talk with you. And he's like, do you want to be a whistleblower? And I said, well, I first of all have to leave Korea if I do that, because in this society, you don't do that. You're ruining everything. Secondly, if I did that, you're going to pay me so much money that I don't care. And he was cheap. He's like, we can't pay you. And I was like, do you think I'm an idiot then? What the hell? Am I doing this for your morality? And I was like, no, I'm young. No, I'm not doing that. And you know what I did? I went to another, because I don't stereotype. I went to another German EPC. I didn't take it as some lesson. And I said, listen, I've got a deal. And I want 1%. And he was like, that's too much. We don't do that. I said, okay, no deal. And I left. And then he comes back. He's telling me a little bit more about it. I said, nope, nothing. And then he finally signed it, 1%. It's an engineering procurement company, big German EPC. And I went back. And the guy said, so you're bringing them to me. What do you get? And I said, 1%. And he looked at me pissed. And that's another lesson. If you're going to be in the middle of a deal like that and the buyer doesn't approve of what you think you're going to get, you might get nothing at all. So don't be clever, Make sure it's consenting on both sides. Number two, you're not allowed to do that kind of deal as a broker-dealer without a license. So I didn't. I was a consultant and I followed the law. In a lot of countries, to sit in the middle of a deal is illegal. Mm-hmm. So if in Korea, the president of Samsung and a startup, and you say, I'm going to introduce you and give 1%, you're breaking Korean law. So you can do it as a consultant and you can have some hours that may be matched to kind of what you were hoping for. Mm-hmm. So fortunately, as a Korean speaker, I'm going to get a lot of hours and paid some value that's really nice, right? And you know what happened? The deal fell through. So they didn't get their deal. No one got their deal. And I lost a job, made a lot of experience. And I know what I learned? I don't have to be an employee working with like these people who have no ambition and they just don't want to lose their job. I want to be rich. I want to go to like Hong Kong and get in the middle of a solar deal where they're selling Honduras for $100 million. And I'm going to go to the Honduras embassy and make a friend, and I'm going to put myself in the middle of the fire. And I did that kind of stuff. I was swinging really hard. I went to Shanghai. I met government officials. And then when I look back, I was like, God, I was crazy. Like they were like, who is this guy? And I used to love that. People would say, who are you? And I say, I'm the person doing this now. I don't need to be anything else. I don't need credentials. I don't need background. I don't need track record. You know what I am? I am the guy with courage that's here in front of you. And that's the only thing you need to know. And it works if you talk. Also, like learning to reframe things. I had another dumb story of these. I met this idiot. I hate when people bring up the pedigree thing. They actually make it such a big deal. So I was trying to get seeding for something. I'm going to be very opaque on purpose. And I went to this joint venture between a Korean company and a French company. And they had like a seeder fund. And I wanted some money for something. And he said, you don't have anyone. He was very direct. Koreans and English can be very direct. He said, you don't have anyone on pedigree on your team. And but pedigree, he said, like MIT or Barclays or Goldman. And we usually don't talk to people who don't have that. I like this kind of talk. It doesn't hurt my feelings. Mm-hmm. You know what I said to him? Okay, so if I just go on LinkedIn, find someone at Barclays, tell them that if I close this deal, I'm going to hire them, I can then have someone on pedigree and I satisfy your dumb requirement. You're wasting my time with this social mumbo jumbo. And he was like, he looked at me and I left and I got on LinkedIn and I found a guy at Barclays and I was like, hey, will you join my team so that I can go back and get this deal and we're going to make money? He was like, sure. And then I emailed him, okay, so I got the pedigree thing out of the way. Let's go. It just, people are stupid that they care about this stuff, And so, I generally feel they are. It's just a waste of my time. If one time I was in Silicon Valley pitching to VCs, like, we generally only invest in people from Stanford and Berkeley. And I was like, what are your fund annualized returns? And he got really quiet. And I said, I think I know you're like 5%. You're in the lower quartile. How's that working out for you? And he just sat there sinking in his chair. I was like, don't be stupid. Okay. And I was like, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. They were surprised I'm talking like that. First of all, this is not a parent-child relationship. I'm an adult man who just left Asia swinging big deals, and you're some employee at a fund. Don't talk to me like you're something. Mm-hmm. I'm a low-power, calm guy, but if you're going to bring ego, first of all, I think you're unintelligent because you're bringing ego to it. We're here to make money. We're here to do deals. We're not here to fill a social status and all this worthless stuff.
A lot of people put a lot of value in that. They have. I think they have to, because if they don't, then their own degree doesn't matter.
My degree doesn't matter. None of it matters because I'm a high self-esteem guy. What a waste of my time. Yeah. It's just something I did to learn some things that I use some things to go do things. There's more to life than trying this. I'm sorry, I'm mean. You're supposed to learn who you are by the time you get out of high school. And if not, go back and do it over again. This is not for business.
Okay, well, I take your point. I would say less. I would say if I was to take a guess, probably 40% of the best security people I know have any degree at all. Of them, maybe less than half have a technical degree. Of them, maybe one has a cybersecurity degree.
Yeah.
And I think that just kind of shows that there are certainly some professions, like, I don't know, being a doctor, for instance. I would really like you to spend some time in school. Make sure you actually know what you're doing before you cut me open. But other things, it really is more experience. I really think that, if you spend years working on something and you can walk around and just say, here's how it all works, and you're doing it with authority, and you're not doing it to be like a dick. You're just like, here's how it actually works. And would you like to know how I can help you fix this thing? And I think I don't care what someone's pedigree is. I don't care where they came from. I don't care really anything about them. But if I see that they are very competent in what I'm trying to hire for, that's it. That's the number one thing.
I think that if you're in business and you're not in a nonprofit, which is important work, if you're not in community service, which is important work, me as a kid who was poor and needed help, and I had many mentors over my life, I did not get where I'm at because of me. I got because I'm at because I had mentors. People who saw something in me and gave me a chance. Okay. So I can joke about idiots not prioritizing the goal, because you look at me, I was a poor kid. I have crooked teeth because I never could afford to fix them. And I had a pretty hard path. I went to Asia because I couldn't get a job in the US. I didn't think I was 80. I studied political science. It's like totally useless degree. Right.
To some degree.
Yeah. Well, you're not going to get a job at McKinsey with it. Not in 2007 anyway. It's a little different now. Right. Yeah. And at that time, the delta between skilled and unskilled was huge too. And I was unskilled. I was an enlisted person in the Army who did paralegal work. And when I got out, transition is hard. Like I worked at Banana Republic catching criminals stealing when I just was working I was the head of claims for Operation Rocky Freedom for 3rd Infantry. I was the head of claims. Right. And I got out and I'm at Banana Republic making like $5.75 an hour. And I'm like, okay, so where are the serious people so that I can get back into that hot seat of working on something that I'm passionate about and important? And then, private sector people treat veterans like crap. You go to a paralegal firm. They have all these dumb standards, like what school did you go to? And I'm like, listen, I have a lot of mental firepower. I'm probably smarter and more determined than all the people who work for you that went to good schools. Let me show you. I'll prove it to you. And so for me, if I make it to that level, that's my hiring approach. I prioritize mental firepower. What is the clock cycles of the brain? How monstrous of a mind do they have? I want a V12 engine in someone's head, and I don't care about anything else about them. Nothing else. I don't care what they look like. I don't care where they're from. I want a monster of a brain that is full of so much energy, it's like almost going to break. You can make a lot of money with people like that. They have a lot of unused energy, and you work with them and direct it and drive it. And a lot of people, when they meet these people, they're intimidated by them. They're scared of them. They ostracize them. If they work in corporate environments, it's the worst, because they'll have some VP over them who's a lame-o who only wants to go home at 5 and has no interest in changing the world. Well, if you have a guy with a V12 engine of a brain under you that went to community college, because not going to the right school is not always about being smart. It's about is that something that your life led you to thinking you would want to do to begin with? Not everybody thinks that the way to be successful is to get into Ivy League school. Maybe you're the president of a Linux user group there, right? And you're thinking that you're going to build some, AI app. And so you're really focused on that. And you just choose to prioritize that path over a different one. So you're that guy and you get a job at a big company and your VP of engineering is a total idiot. By total idiot, he just says things that make no sense. He's insecure with himself. He wants to look good in front of the boss, all things that don't matter to serious people, right? And, that guy's going to treat you like crap because he's scared of you. He doesn't want the boss to see that you're smarter than him and all these things that losers care about, I have some opinions about that. I think a good company culture goes like this. It has to start from the top. In my company, I have a rule. In any company I do, if you take credit for an engineer's work, you're fired. So you're going to come forward and say, this person did this awesome thing, and I helped in this particular way only. You exaggerate nothing, right? And I'm lucky to get to work with this person and enable them. And then I'm going to promote you for being the person who enables people. I hate people that take credit for other people's stuff. But I understand why in companies people chop each other up, because it comes from idiot CEOs who enable that culture. In my company, if you do that, you're fired. I don't care what you do because you're just a piece of crap, you know?
I do know what you're saying. I have definitely worked in both environments. I've worked in the extremely open and everyone's very honest with each other about what's going on. It's like, well, why is your work sucking today? Well, I'm actually really busy. I'm actually got something going on in my backyard right now. Yep. Okay, well, that makes sense why you're sucking today, because you're sucked today. And
yep.
you know, we have that kind of dialogue, and it's very open and honest and fun, actually. You can kind of prod each other in a positive way, like, get back to work, man. You suck. Or the other one, which is you can't say anything to anybody, and the tiniest critique, and not even to their boss, to them directly, like one-on-one, is way too much. They're way too sensitive, and the status quo protects them.
I think, I have a hypothesis that, I'll give an example of where this comes from. It just takes 2 or 3 people to run the culture for everybody else. So when I was at the Korea Energy Economic Institute, right? So I had the window open and I was hot and I wanted to cool air. Okay. And I was in an office with like 7 or 8 other people. And I went by and this person said to me, no one likes the window open. Can you close it? And she had a blanket on. And I said, everyone here, raise your hand if you don't like the window open. No one raised their hand. I said, it's only you. Don't lie to me. I'm not opening the window, closing the window. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people try to use the imaginary other to bully people or control their behavior. So I always ask people, raise your hand. And if you can't tell me, then it's not real. Now, people don't like that. It's confrontational, but sometimes what you learn is one person's trying to direct the culture for everybody else by using the fact that people don't like confrontation to direct all of them into what this one person wants.
I'm also worried that someone's talking behind their back.
Yeah.
No one wants to be that person.
Exactly. I hate people who try to control the culture of a company by using the silent other. Then you just don't get represented then. And if that's really what they think, they're not going to get represented because they can't say it. I'm sorry. We're all adults. We got out of high school. If you're unable to express yourself, you don't deserve to be heard. That's just my opinion.
It's a controversial one. A lot of people will say, well, yes, but a lot of people they're too sensitive. I mean, they literally will go home crying if someone confronts them directly. And they're good workers. They're good at UI or UX or something. And why wouldn't we allow them to have their quiet voice and complain to their manager only?
You know what? Then write it in a letter and put it on my desk or ask someone to help you. But my most important thing is to go about it in a path that is honest without any ambiguity. Mm-hmm. If you're very sensitive, that's perfectly fine. I can adjust for you if you're amazing and you don't like my voice because it has bass on it or reminds you of a traumatic boyfriend or a girlfriend. No problem.
Or just hate conflict.
But here is what I would like.
A lot of people hate conflict.
Here's what I would like, though. I would like a very analytical articulation of your position. That's all. That's just me. I mean...
Yeah, but good luck. I mean, very analytical about the window being open. I mean,
just tell me,
whatever it is.
Listen, just be honest then. Say, I want the window closed because it disaffects my ability to do my job well. Right? And no one else actually that I know of has a problem with it. It's just me and I need this to my job. Okay, I'll close it.
Sure.
Don't lie to me though. Mm-hmm. And say others. There is no others. I'm sensitive to this because in Japanese or Korean culture, right, there is this collective. And that collective operates, I call it the imaginary boogeyman. Everybody afraid of a person who they don't know exactly who it is if they see them doing something. Mm-hmm. In Korea in the 90s, women were not allowed to smoke outside cigarettes. So they would smoke outside and they're worried about somebody thinking negative of them. You know what I would do? I'd walk up to every guy in front of them and say, do you have a problem? Nope, no one has a problem. I'm going to kick the table over and learn while that's there. And that's how you stop bullying, through this passive aggression. So maybe my style is not good and I have to learn a lot. My intention is that I cannot live with passive aggression controlling culture.
I don't think it's a bad or good style. I just think that it's in conflict with other people's style. But the alternative is let's corral everybody together and get this massive consensus about whatever it is, and everyone gets their say so. And my anecdote about this that I use pretty frequently is eBay had this mission statement. It was on everybody's like little card that you had to swipe. It was on the back of their card or whatever, and it was like this 8 stanza thing. It's like, we're here to empower people and make change and like there's a bunch of different things but they're all random. They're all completely different. And I'd go up to people and they're like, eBay's, got such good marketing and, all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, you every day put on this badge every single day. What does it say? And everyone would stumble. They're like, it's like empowering shopping or something. Like there's something about Beanie Babies, I think. I don't know what it is. Yeah. And how that thing came to be was a lot of people got in a room instead of one brilliant person coming up with a great mission statement. And they got consensus from all these people. And I'm sure everyone was very happy with the result. Yeah. And it was shit. Unmemorable shit. And I think we have to kind of decide as a society, do we want consensus to run? Do we want actual expertise to win, where we get great product and everybody's happy with it? The talent is efficiently utilized to do the thing that they are purpose built for and that they love doing and frankly are way better than everybody else? Or do we want consensus where we end up with garbage, like real garbage?
I like me being a wrestler in high school. I like the wrestler's model to life. So if you want to get on the wrestling team, I went to a high school with 2,000 kids. You have to beat every single person who wants to wrestle that weight and be number one, right? And then once you make that team spot, you have to stay at that weight unless you want to beat the person above you's weight, right? So everything is very combative, and you're going to learn what you're made of very fast. And then when you go to wrestle other schools, you're wrestling the best kid at that school out of another 2,000 kids who all wanted that spot. And then the best in the area and the best in the state. And if you're really good, the best in the nation or the world. So I like sorting people like that. I think it's a great model. And if
called a hierarchy.
it's a hierarchy that is earned organically, right? It's organically earned. And I don't think we should have other people who are not the best represented on the wrestling floor. It's okay. It's not meant for you. So you can find something else you're good at. People have to find their path. Not everything is for everyone.
So not all sports are like that. For instance, like Formula One, you end up with a lot of nepotism and extremely, extremely wealthy people just getting their kids into Formula One.
Yeah, I'm on the losing side of that. I always wanted to be a race car driver. But, I'm not upset about it. I'm not jealous. Like, look, the world's a messy place. It's going to have all kind of things that are unfair. It doesn't really matter to me. If you're going to focus on the things you can't have, you're going to be a miserable person. So you know what my solution is? Well, I got to get rich then so that I can do it. And maybe I'll fail, but I'll have a good life trying. I think some people are just optimistic no matter what. You could put me, like I said, in the army and like in the worst situation like I was for 7 years in the field, and I'm going to be happy. And that's my personality. I remember when I was in this thing called JRTC, and we're down in Louisiana training for 30 days, like in a warfighter, right? And they have special operations guys there, and we have Russian Hind helicopters, and it's fun. And it's at 3 a.m. hopping on a Black Hawk, and, people get hurt. Things happen, and it's full combat speed warfighter, right? And I remember I was on a Black Hawk at like 3 a.m. with a commander, and he was like, hop off. I'm jumping off the helicopter. I didn't realize that we were so black, I couldn't tell whether we are 100 yards up or on the ground. I couldn't feel the elevation change. And they're all jumping out of the helicopter, and I'm scared that like there's just air and I've got nothing, no chute, no rope, nothing. I went to air assault school, so I did rappelling and all that stuff out of helicopter, training for out of helicopter and helicopter chain link operations and all that stuff. I was air assault qualified. And so we were doing this warfighter, and it sucked, dude. You're out there, it's like 95 degrees. Your pain on your face, it's like in your pores. You got gigantic pimples from this like glue this paint in your face, like huge pus, pimples. You don't care anymore. You've got no energy to care about how you look, right? And if you haven't seen a woman in like 3 weeks, if you're a male and you are into women, it doesn't matter how she looks. You're like, she's beautiful, right? And if you haven't had milk in 3 weeks and you're in the dirt and the mud and it's everything sucks and it's hot and disgusting and you're running around, you're tired and you're taking fire from the OP4 and, people have short tempers and colonels have their careers on the line. From their perspective, they want to look good and get promoted. Everything's tense. And my friend and I were on the berm, like the dugout around the TOC. I was at Tactical Operations Center, and I was in the first Infantry, 327th Infantry, 1st Brigade, something like that. I don't remember the battalion. Anyway, and we're on the berm, and it's this huge mound around the Tactical Operations where the brigade commander is, and it sucks, right? It's hot, disgusting. Everybody's angry. The food sucks. And you only have water. There's no juice, no nothing, just water. And you put in cocoa powder in the water and your taste buds get lost, right? So you think it's like milk. You're like, this is milk. You just can't tell the difference because your taste buds are shot. And you're fatigued and tired. And I'll just keep stressing that. And the guy next to me, we all at South Park, right? So, you can either be miserable and, totally not fit for this in military, or you can be very positive. And we started doing South Park voices. So I learned to do South Park voices with this one kid who was from, by the way, he was from like the Bronx. And he was this 4'11" pit bull of a guy who did actual MMA. Like he's on YouTube and fights. And he was one of my best friends. And he was this, short black guy. And he was like part Puerto Rican. And man, he was just like vicious kid. We loved each other, because I have ADHD. I like edgy stuff. So, and if I was an edgy guy, we're friends. I had another friend in Korea who was infantry, and he was on the DMZ. He was in DMZ for like 3 years. He's like crazy. He kept re-enlisting to stay there. And on the DMZ, it's the real Korean soldiers. So he learned Korean, talking to them every day, and he had the worst vocabulary in Korean, the worst words. Things I didn't even know how to say. Like, you're as dirty as a blah, blah, blah private area. Like, It was like bad, And I was like, I want to be your roommate, and I'm going to re-enlist just to hang out with you.
Was it, out of curiosity, was that a friendly banter across the wire, or was it...
No, he with the South Korean soldiers, and they loved him, They
Not
loved
the North Koreans, though.
He was like 6'3" white guy who had the highest physical training score, like in the 8th United States Army when we re-enlisted to be in Seoul. He was a machine. He ran like 11:45 2 mile, but he was like 220 pounds of muscle, right? And we would go to Seoul alone together, and I was like, this guy's wild and unhinged, great friend to have. So I re-enlisted, and I was like, dude, re-enlist, and we're going to move to Seoul together and arrange our packets. And we got the same apartment together. I met him in the Professional Leader Development School in Korea. We had to go land nav through Korean mountains and stuff. And so I was like, I met him there, and I was like, this guy's crazy. I'm going to have so much fun. So I partly re-enlisted just to hang out with him in Seoul. And so going back to that, I always like people like that. And there was this kid, from like, I think in Bronx or somewhere, and he was like, used to be in a gang, and he like got in trouble, and, he had his father was abusive, and we really got along. And I guess kids of trauma get along. And everybody else was like, you two are nuts, right? So we're taking fire, and he's like, goddamn can? I don't know. And like the brigade commander comes outside. He's like, who's watching South Park?
Yeah.
And so like my point about telling the story was like, it doesn't matter the circumstance. For me, I'm blessed by God or fate or genetics that I try to always find something pleasant in the worst situation. And I think that that's really important in life. I think that if we could help people, it's to figure out how do we turn that gene on or turn that personality on where people can see the best in the worst situations. Because I think there is a self-fulfilling prophecy to stuff like that. As a poor kid, what I can say about that personality is that it attracts people to you. People like people who believe in the future, right? But it's very much engineered. You can't become that person. And so like to that, I'm very blessed, right? Because I was always that kid. When I was homeless or when my stuff was on the clothes on there, and I was like, well, I get to get new stuff, I guess. Mm-hmm. That's what I was thinking, right? I guess this will be exciting and an adventure. I don't have to live with my parents anymore, and this is definitely a clean break.
Yeah.
And that's how I saw it. But I think that you subtly inherit some trauma, right? Because there's a part of your brain totally not
subtly. Most people would be pretty traumatized.
There's a part of your brain totally not processing it. You know what I mean? And so maybe I have some anxieties as a result of that as I get older and things, and it sticks with you, right?
So why quantum computing? Why? So you really like business, you really want to make a bunch of money. It's quite obvious. Why quantum?
Well, it can do a lot of really beautiful things for people, right? So we can I think that the world's in a bit of we're riding a tightrope. So we're heading into a world of resource scarcity. There's certainly not enough resources for another billion people to get out of poverty, not without a lot of constraint and limitation. So in order to make that happen, we need a more resource abundant world. Quantum computers can solve a couple of problems a little bit better than classical computers. One of them will be optimizations around nuclear fusion. Others will be like drug discovery, if faster.
Or chemicals,
material science, things that are necessary. And when you put them all together, it leads to really beautiful, awesome things. Like maybe we'll have, the batteries we have today are crap. I think in 25 years, there's a small chance that we have I used to work for an emerging technology tech scouting company. It was really fun. It was called Lux Research. This one out of Lux Capital. They have a database of tens of thousands of deep tech companies around the world. And you can read the summaries of all the reports where it's at and like lithium air and all this stuff. And when you read this, you're so excited. You're like, man, you see them making progress and you realize eventually we're going to have batteries that have the same energy density as gasoline, which means that you would have sorry to be a military
very explosive battery.
you would maybe not, but I'm not a chemist. Maybe we have Reaper drones or micro drones that can hover 9 hours above a unit, and he has haptic feedback on his uniform, and the micro drone that's hovering there for 12 hours on one battery gives you a haptic feedback where the enemy is coming in close combat. And that's one thing of military applications will come from. So quantum computers help us answer some of these questions, I believe, possibly, I'd like to believe. And if it's not quantum computers, fine, then it's computing, right? It's computers that will give us these answers. And so I'm less interested in the quantum part and more in trying to being myself in South Park on the berm, trying to find silver lining. And I want to look for those things. I think that when it comes to politics and the distribution of resources, we're arguing about something that doesn't matter in 20 years. And so it's a lot of wasted energy on the present. If we took a lot of our national resources and put it towards solving these problems, then all the things we're arguing about go away. And so that's how I see it. Me, like I told you, like it makes sense now, my personality. I don't have patience for the emotional stuff. And when people say they want a better future, then don't get distracted with the emotional stuff, the arguments, the ego, being better than someone. These are useless things in the future that we're going to create. You're not going to have to deal with that kind of stuff. If we can bring nuclear fusion to the grid in 25 years, then we can also have costless desalination for fresh water. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a camp, if I were to be political, who don't want that future because they want to punish people and teach us to live within our means. And I think these people are evil. I think we should have a future where we don't live within our means and we're going to continue to consume the rest of the solar system. And I think humans should be arrogant. I think we should say we deserve to it. We should go colonize Mars and Europa and the rest and continue the march forward, not stop. I know that language is offensive to some people, so we can find other language.
I don't know that it is. I'm sure some will.
Let me say this. Aggressively, shamelessly, monster-like way, put our flags on the rest of the planets and be proud to be those people, not ashamed. To be the wrestler dominating.
But it was interesting you said that one of the benefits of the Western culture is we got rid of imperialism and colonialism.
It was a joke. I'm just, yeah.
Well, but
well, Carl Sagan said the same thing, so he suggested that, he didn't say that, but what he said was, it's in human DNA to seek far out, distant, barren lands, right? To then move to and immigrate to, right? And make our own. And that is the human nature. Now, we can talk.
It's inevitable.
Yes. And we should be excited about that, not ashamed about that, in my opinion,
Yeah.
So I think there's more important things about Europa than seeing if there was microbial life there. Like, how about putting humans there and just polluting the thing and taking it over as ours?
Polluting it.
Taking it over as ours, you know? I think we have to be like a...
So you're going to be the first litterer on Mars?
It's not about littering, but it's like the most important thing is for humans to expand to the solar system, and it's not to preserve it. It's ours to take.
It would be kind of funny to be the first litterer on Mars. We can't, I mean, we
are littering already, right?
Yeah, well, the United States, well, yeah, I guess with robots, they're just kind of all over the place. We're already there. Okay, so Germany has recently said that they're moving away from the NSA preferred encryption kyber.
Okay.
To something else. I forget what it was.
Classic McLeese. Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
It's the stupidest thing in the entire world, because this, like, the key size, like 1 megabyte. So what are the use cases for that? There's a lot of things they alienate. So they're just going to be having a whole bunch of applications they can't fulfill. You know, it's kind of childish to say, oh, I don't want to stop the NSA from spying on Germany. I got news for you. You can't do anything about that. Nothing you can do. In the 1980s, I remember the United States geospatial could, every kid knew this in the 80s. We could tell you in Moscow if a penny is heads or tails. If the United States wants to know what you're doing, it's kind of pointless to try to stop them. Privacy is important, right? But this battle they're doing is so childish. The NSA picked kyber because they're going to use it for, like, STRATCOM, strategic command, like nuclear weapons. It's going to be transmitting secure data. It's going to be used for our financial infrastructure. It's going to be used for medical records, things we don't want advanced persistent threats breaking into. So you just, in a matter of anti-Americanism and counterculture, are going to oppose the thing that people genuinely believe in, or everything is a trick, a conspiracy. You know, one of the low IQ things about anti-Americanism is that everything is a conspiracy. That's how they see it. The U.S. is all powerful, so whatever they're deciding is a trick. It's like analytically without like any coherent reasoning. So they're going to trust every part of American infrastructure, including oil refineries, all to trick Germany into giving their secrets. That's very self-centered. Honestly, Germany doesn't have that much to offer the U.S. anyway.
Okay, except for we are spying on everybody.
That's what they do the same thing, though, sure. Right?
Yeah,
but you got to pick your battles. Mm-hmm. Like, if they think that encryption is where the U.S. is going to spy on them, well, guess what? There's radio spectrum, there's remote sensing, there's all kind of areas for that, right? And I think this encryption thing is just like almost like a virtue signaling. And it's ridiculous. And the McLeese also has a lot of known vulnerabilities, and it's not better than a lot of them. And it's been tested for a very long time. And it has known issues. So they all do. So, kind of wonder, if it has known issues, then what are you really making this argument? And quite honestly, like, Germany also relies in part on the U.S. as a trade partner, and we have to be interoperable, and there need to be no barriers to entry for American companies to enter Germany's market. And because it's the same way the other one. We have to accelerate global commerce, not slow it down. And if it were up to me, we would be back into the free trade business with our partners, but we would offset some of the downsides, like sectors losing their area. Automation is going to wipe out sectors anyway. We have to grow global GDP. We have to be hungry for more again. We have to want more, and we have to stop trying to live within our means. We have to grow. And so we need to have a well-oiled economy where we can import and export with no barriers to entry very fast, so we all can make more money and create more jobs. And anything that is in the way of that is stupid, in my opinion.
And yet, here we are. But from their perspective, they might be thinking, well, we really don't want this very specific set of information being spied on by the United States. Oh, and by the way, the United States gets hacked into all the time.
Okay, so then for their intelligence services or government, do whatever proprietary encryption they want. But for regular businesses, make it interoperable for people.
I mean, their version of NIST or something.
Look, we all have to be using the same encryption, at least for the purpose of commerce. If every time a company goes to a new market, they have to buy all new IT equipment again, this is just a con to create industries that don't deserve to exist.
Okay. So the problem with that is, if you go and you buy a Huawei switch or a firewall, you're definitely getting something extra with that.
Yes.
if they are interested in giving you something extra with it, right? That's one of the reasons it's banned in the United States, as an example. I think it's inevitable that we're going to see balkanization of every single technology thing, including AI, including quantum, including literally any technology you can think of, cars, everything.
Here's the problem.
Because why wouldn't you do it? First of all, it stimulates your local economy. It creates resources like intelligence inside your group, and also you have less vulnerability.
Balkanizing yourself away from the U.S. economy is really unwise. So, United States, definitely, Germany doesn't have anything going for itself in quantum computing, right? So, that quantum computer that we're not going to share with them, that actually scales, right? That's a weapon, an economic weapon. We can print cures for drugs they could never print, right? So, it's kind of like standing off, you're staring down Goliath on a battle you can't win. And it would be much better to lean into the United States and figure out how to work. Trying to stand off with the U.S. is suicide, not because of weapons, but because you're never going to keep up with innovation here. You're just not. Germany's definitely not.
Well, Germany may not. Yes, I agree. But what about China? Wouldn't it make absolutely all the sense in the world to balkanize? I mean,
yeah, sure, 100%.
But not like. I mean, so for instance,
I believe a free trade with every country except for China and North Korea and Iran.
I was going to say North Korea would be my next one because they have their own operating systems, they have their own browsers, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a good reason for it. I understand it, and they bake extra goodies into it, of course, for their own population. I did a lot of work on Nanera browsers, which is the Red Star operating system. It's the North Korean operating system. And there's extra goodies buried in that code. So if you try to do X, Y, and Z, they can tell that you're that kind of person who does that kind of thing, and off to the gulag. Yeah. But why would they allow Firefox or Chrome or any of that technology to ever permeate them when they get all the benefits of being able to spy on the population and less of the vulnerability, theoretically, if they had none, associated with these large mass-scale browsers and web apps and whatever else.
My views on China come at it from a different angle. I'm not interested in universal morality. So, like, if we do it, they should. This is a stupid argument. The question I would ask Americans that departs from American culture, starting to be a conversation, is, so I had an argument with this Chinese gentleman, and he was party member or whatever, and he was saying that America does this, and so China should be able to do that. And I said, I just have a question for you. How does it benefit me? And I'm going to tell you what things I value. I'm never kissing anybody's ring, right? I'm never going to be a personality that fits in collectivist culture. And I want to be rich, and I want to be able to be more powerful than a government as a person who pursues wealth in the American way, right? And I will never have I want to have a path to have no one over me. Doesn't mean I'm going to achieve it. For my morale, my happiness, I have to believe there's a path to a life where no one tells me what to do. And is there a place in the world for me with China's rise? And, that the person said no, you'd have to kill us all if that's what you want. And I said, so then you realize I have to stop China's rise because you don't benefit me. It's not about what's right or wrong. The question is, does it benefit me? And I was talking to this gentleman in Atlanta, right? He was an IT company. And he was like, talking about TikTok. He's like, well, America spies too. And I said, yes, but does it benefit you in particular if China spies on you? Because they're going to use it to affect how you vote. They're going to use it to make you poorer and copy it. So it doesn't benefit you. So cut this moral crap out and just ask selfishly, how does it benefit me? Buy the things I value. And if China's rise doesn't materially benefit Americans, by the things they value, then we have to be opposed to it. Not on moral grounds, selfish grounds.
So why not use a Chinese VPN if you're an American? I mean, most Americans don't care. They're just going to the low cost, they're buying Chinese goods on Amazon. Why not use a Chinese firewall or a Chinese switch or Chinese VPN or whatever?
Well, I think if you want to buy Chinese goods, buy Chinese goods. You want to buy a Chinese optic for your rifle, go for that. The data collection stuff is very different, right? So they connect that for automated cognitive warfare. So there's a couple of things in there at once. We're going to dissect that. So if you read like Edward Bernays or Walter Lippmann, I like Walter Lippmann in particular, on these are propaganda related books, right? The idea is you want to automate that propaganda, like micro-targeting advertisements. Look at like cigarettes in the 50s and 60s. Women smoke cigarettes in films. That was planted there by advertisements to trick women into thinking that if you smoke a cigarette, you look sexy. So therefore, they would create that industry. You can do the same thing to affect with a country's self-esteem. So let's say, for example, we pick on France, right? And we're going to run some advertisements or products or YouTube rankings that talk about French colonialism. We're going to tweak it just a little bit every once in a while, right? And about being like, it's a very fascist culture. Like in Asia, you'll see this where you judge people by things they can't decide. So you'll judge someone by what their family's job is. Or like in Asia, in some places, if your parents were divorced, they're not going to let you marry their daughter because you're going to be judged by that thing you can't decide, right? So let's say you start introducing that real subtly on these TikTok videos, that it's okay to judge people by things they can't decide, real subtle. You can do this in a programmatic way. They're collecting the data to be able to do that and direct us into a culture that's more symbiotic with theirs, in that they have the power to do that. In fact, they write papers on their intention to do that, right? So when they collect data, they have more micro-targeting information. And look at like ChatGPT. Well, imagine in 5 years a 10 times more powerful ChatGPT, and you give it data on 1 million people and said, I want to lower their national self-esteem, and I want you to develop a strategy for me to do that. I can give you a strategy today. So let's say we buy 4 papers in France. And once a quarter, we run a paper on atonement for French colonial history, right? And then we have a politician we put money in, and they bring it up, right? Does it lower the self-esteem of the French population over time? 100%. Would they then maybe pull back some of their international presence and erode the liberal world order? Yes. So then can you sway an entire population's self-esteem and foreign policy by messing with their heads on history? Yes. The top national security priority for the United States is to address the sins of the past, but have super high self-esteem, to love themselves and say, I'm amazing despite all that. But here's the thing, the caveat. If I say that, some people look disgusted. Mm-hmm. Then you realize the dishonesty of their intention. They don't want you to atone for sins. They want you to have low self-esteem. Low self-esteem people are controllable. And I think the most important things for Americans of all ethnic groups and histories is to be uncontrollable people. That's the kind of endearing thing about 2020 protests. Whether you like it or not, it's people demonstrating a very American thing, uncontrollable. Now, certainly me in Seattle, I did not enjoy it at all. In fact, I was angry. But in hindsight, from a wisdom perspective, being uncontrollable is the most endearing thing you can have. To be uncontrollable, though, we also have to have a high national self-esteem. So one of the traps people in other countries use with the U.S. is they'll say Americans are warmongers. Actually, Americans say that to themselves, right? In the scale of history, America is extremely reserved. In Korea, what they taught me in graduate school, America is a benign empire or a benign superpower. That's what Koreans see us as. How did we get neutered, though? Like, what happened? Because we haven't always been that. Obviously 20 years of war didn't help, right? It's a horrible thing that a lot of people died. And I think that Americans who in the Cold War were taught you're the good guys. In the Cold War, we did a lot of horrible things, right? Of course. But the narrative was curated around only the good things. I think that if everyone has the truth, I like the truth, but if you absorb, like there's 1,000 truths that can exist about one topic. We can talk about the war with Japan in World War II. You can talk about firebombing 500,000 people, or you can talk about internment camps, or you can talk about Japanese sex camps, testing chemical weapons on people. Sometimes there are no black and white clear truths. Sometimes you just hope you're on the right side and you swing at it. Sometimes to be the good guy, you don't have to be 100% good. You just have to be 51% good, not 30% good, right?
And sometimes you're going to be wrong.
Yeah, and you're going to be on a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And I think that for the most of the world, especially for women, right, America winning was better for everybody, especially for women, right? There is a path to more equality for them. If the US didn't win, there was no path. There was no will in all the world that they were going to have a platform. Look at the rest of the world. You know, that's one of the things that disappoints me about American arguments about equality and stuff. It's very important, but it omits the rest of the world, right? Because we're afraid of offending their culture. 5 billion people out of like 7 or 8 live under tyranny. 5 billion people live in cultures where women are treated like second-class citizens, right? And we have a job to do, and that is to still liberate them. You can call that colonial, whatever, and go fuck yourself because you're not an empathetic person. You haven't lived overseas and see that. You know, I had a friend in school in Asia who was from Alabama, but ethnically Korean. And her parents married her off to someone who she didn't want to be with, right? Well, that's their culture. That's fine. But I think we don't really know crap about the world, and that kind of bothers me a little bit on this topic, right?
But I also think they don't know much about us.
We have so much progress.
That goes both ways.
And we have more progress to do, right? But we should have very high self-esteem. We should love ourselves because we've come so far.
But when I travel overseas, I find a lot of times people think very strange things about Americans.
Oh, that's true too. It goes the other way.
Yeah.
Like we only eat hamburgers.
Yeah.
Or we have no culture except, that. And I tell them, you know what American culture is? That we're high trust people. And that's the most beautiful thing about us.
I remember having a conversation with this guy. I was kind of forced to be in a house with him and another guy for a conference, just the way the conference was organized. And he was extremely aggressive towards me as soon as he found out I was American. Extremely aggressive. And I'm just kind of being myself, normal guy. And I'm like, okay. And he was trying to kind of trap me into thinking or saying things about the first Gulf War or something. I can't remember exactly what it was now. And I'm like, no, that's not what happened. He's like, oh, you're not like those other Americans. You actually know what's going on. I'm like, yeah. And he was saying something about whoever the president was at the time. And I'm like, you realize like I have nothing to do with what you're talking about here. You're like really taking this out on me personally, but that has nothing to do with me. And after a while he calmed down, but then we started talking about firearms. And I wasn't particularly into firearms, but I grew up on a ranch, so we had them around. And and he's like, well, yeah, you're just an American because you have guns everywhere. And I'm like, I lived on a ranch. I mean, like there was like rabid animals and, like actual reasons you actually had to protect yourself. And it couldn't quite get it through his head at first. And then the more I explained the kinds of bad things that had actually happened on the ranch, he sort of calmed down. He's like, okay, well, that's different. Like you're different. I get that too. One of the things, it's along those lines. American have an idolized version of Europe that doesn't exist. And we beat ourselves up on comparing ourselves to Europe that never existed. Europe has a lot of racism. Czech Republic has gun laws just like the United States. In Austria, you can buy an automatic weapon. You just get a license. Well, we have to get like all kinds of extra permits to get guns Austrians are allowed to have. They can have, in Austria, whether it's a 16-inch barrel, assault rifle, or it's a 10-inch super dangerous assault rifle, they don't care. You can own both. Austrians own automatic weapons in their houses, and they have filed paperwork for it. And then in Czech Republic, they conceal carry pistols down the street. So that's Europe. Europe has guns. What Europe were you talking about? And, so I think we make this idolized place that just doesn't exist. I definitely have a friend in downtown Munich who carries a gun every day. He did whatever he had to do to get there, but apparently it's very onerous, but you could do it.
Yeah. And they certainly have them in Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Mm-hmm, They're very Montana-like people.
Right.
Right.
I mean, they invented the biathlon, which is the shooting and skiing sport.
Right. So, It's my point about this is not so much about the gun debate, but we make a Europe that doesn't exist and we introduce it to our debate. And I'm going to guess that happens to other countries too. They make an America that doesn't exist and they use this for like a local debate, Mm-hmm. But I will tell you a funny story about the collective responsibility for the others. So when I was in South Korea, in 2003, there was a lot of anti-Americanism. Like my friend was driving a Hummer. I was in the Army then. And these South Koreans got some paintball guns that had red paintballs and fired them at the Humvee. That's like a death threat, right? So this kind of stuff happened a lot. And we had advice when you're outside the base, because the fever was high, be careful. And, sure enough, I walked into the situation, and I was, one time I was getting a rose for a girl, and this guy comes up and says, you're Bush in Iraq war. And I said, I don't know, God bless me. I was like super witty at the moment. I said, hold on. And we don't have smartphones, that it doesn't exist. I had a flip phone, right? And I pulled it up. And he's looking at me, and he's like, what are you doing? Hold on. And all these Koreans are looking at me. I'm embarrassed and humiliated. He's like going to punish me in public. And I said, Bush wants to talk to you. You fucking tell him, not me. And I said, get out of my face. You're a fucking idiot. And then he looked shocked, and everybody was laughing at this guy, And the other Koreans were like, good on you. That was funny. Mm-hmm. And I just showed him, you're an idiot for acting like that, You have to know that I wasn't as fat as I am today, and I was in the Army, and I ran a 12:32 mile, and I never lost a fight in the Army. So, of course, I'm going to push the wire a little bit on that and go over it. And I humiliated this guy for acting like that. Not always going to do. You got to read the room, I grew up a little bit around people with street smarts. There was another time I was at a department store, and I was shopping for a piece of jewelry for a woman, and I go into the bathroom. And in Korea, there were a lot of these cases where Koreans would corner American soldiers in the bathroom, make a fight, and it's in the news. Of course, Americans at that, we grew up fighting. They beat the crap out of that dude, right? They would actually go try to make a fight to get beat so they could go to the press and make a case to get America out of South Korea. That came from pro-North Korean forces. This was like a real cognitive warfare in South Korea, where there were pro-North Korean forces who would instigate South Koreans to get really emotional about Americans and then go try to get beat up by Americans so that it would be in the news. They did this on purpose. I know that as a fact.
Interesting.
You remember that I worked for JAG. We had lots of information about shit happening there. And this happened, and it was coordinated. They literally coordinated. And it happened to me. I go in the bathroom, and this guy comes in and stands off at the door. When you stand off with an American in a bathroom, you're thinking this is going to be the most violent experience of your life. You're thinking this is life or death. In the bathroom in American movies is where people go to die when you make a fight, right? So I was like, holy cow, this is real. And one of my Mexican-American friends, one of my best friends, I remember, I won't say his name, Thomas. He was my homeboy. And he was a big dude too. He came walking up behind him, and he opened the door, and he called for the security guard with the door open. And I knew not to make a fight, and I knew not to chest buff, because I didn't want to create another media incident to be anti-American. Not only that, I didn't want my photo all over the papers. So I experienced that overseas, and it's sad.
Unfortunately, that stuff doesn't make the news. There's 100 incidents that didn't make the news that didn't end up in a fight.
Yeah,
but they not for lack of trying.
Living in Korea, I used to get really frustrated with American media because they would side with these people. They love trashing on our own.
Yeah, of course.
And I wrote like with CNN or someone, and I was like, hey, this is not what's happening, right? Like, I know these people, and this is not true. They're not interested in it. It's like in Seattle, they had the CHOP, and there was a YouTube video of the real gangster, he has a criminal record, handing out AR-15s to other people. Well, that's super illegal, right? You have to be licensed, you don't have to have a license, but you have to have attribution for that firearm. You can't go just give somebody a gun, right? Not in Washington State anyway.
It took me a minute to remember what you're talking about. Chaz, Chop.
Whatever it's called, right?
Yeah.
They were handing out guns. And then you have Rolling Stone saying these are peaceful people. And there was like somebody like stabbed there. And I was like, look, one of the problems with some people is that they're so sure what is good, they skip all the things in between. And I think when it comes to reporting on things, that the ends never justify the means, no matter how noble, because there's always blowback once people figure out they were deceived. And I think that it's very important to report on things like a robot with no stake in the game, so that we don't run the risk of blowback. This is not moral posturing blowback, because in Korea, there was a huge blowback for this like engineering of anti-Americanism. And the right wing swept several presidents in a row eventually in Korea in response to this nonsense. And, the same thing happens in the United States when one side gets ahead of themselves and they omit a lot of facts just because they want to get to the conclusion. Well, once people figure that out, there's going to be some pretty bad blowback and everybody loses credibility. So in order to have credibility, to be a trusted person, we must never be emotional in that we're skipping important information and context. And in America bothers me nowadays because the people who report on things on all sides do not care about the nuance. And that nuance is important. Things are complicated. Nothing is simple, no matter the social topic. And whether you're liberal or conservative, it's important that we're high open people and we want to capture nuance and go about things slow and without haste and to understand things. And the media is almost like trying to rush us into conclusions. Mm-hmm. And that makes us stupider people. And you see it everywhere in the world. I saw it in Korea when there was this thing, mad cow disease. So some Korean press doctored some videos. It was literally doctored. And because it kind of reminds me of America today, they were in such a hurry to demonize America. These particular groups, in Korea, they were leftist groups. They're very like anti-U.S., pro-North Korean groups. They have a twisted history where they think that if just the U.S. didn't intervene, that they would still be unified with Korea. Yeah, under North Korea. But there are people in Korea who think that's okay. They're ethnic nationalists, and they think that just being together is the most important thing. And I was like, that's kind of racist. You realize that you're not the same people. You look similar, but your culture is different. Just like Ukraine and Russians may have some ethnic shared heritage, but they're different people. It's just like you. So that thinking also kind of, it's like you never got out of 1945 with this fascist thinking, cutting the world along racial lines. And a lot of Asia is divided still by racial lines. It's a very racist place. So when you're in Asia, when you're at a party in Hong Kong, people may introduce themselves as their ethnic identity. Like in the Middle East, they may, I'm a Muslim, and those might say I'm a Japanese. They don't mean passport, they mean ethnically. And that, so people will introduce themselves by their ethnicity. In America, this is like, you're going to get kicked out of the bar if you do that, right? You can't go up to people and say, what is your race? In Asia, this is like very common because they think they know about you if you have that. Because culture in Asia, except for Singapore and a few places, especially Northeast Asia, it's cultural lines are divided by skin color or your race, right? And so that's a very different world. In my perspective, it's almost like it never progressed after 1945. And that part does scare me, for a lot of people in Asia, to be a nationality is to look a certain way. And I think that Americans have no idea about that. And if that's what's going to rule the world order, we're rolling back to 1945 and all our progress is wiped out.
So do we win? 5-10 years down the road, are we going to win?
Well, back to that guy on the berm telling South Park jokes. I have to believe that, right? And
do you believe it?
I think we have a fighting chance to win. And I define winning as a couple of things. The liberal world order preserves. There is no changes. There are no alternative economic models. There is no further growth of authoritarianism in the United States or overseas. And I want to make a comment about that. Both parties in the United States are at fault for temptations around authoritarianism. This desire to just control more to solve all our ills, or social ills. And we have to resist that. Maybe we just live with social ills because that's better than living under a more controlling society. Maybe that's a fair philosophical conversation that America doesn't even have with itself.
Yep, agreed.
So we have to resist that.
So would you roll back legislation then? Like, what does that look like?
There's a joke. For every one law we make, we should delete 2.
I think Trump did that, actually. That was a real thing.
It's not a bad strategy. I mean, like...
Or at minimum, we should have to go back and decide whether every single law on the books should still be there every 10 years, let's say.
There's like thousands of pages for laws. Nobody understands them. Nobody reads them. I have a hypothesis, and I haven't tested it. I bet you the income gap in America is in part created by divorce. All the money you have, not sharing your wealth with your spouse, the fees to the lawyer. I bet you, let's calculate that. If 50% of the population divorce, this is a big wealth transfer from that household to the attorney. But the attorneys also write the law. This is a kind of conspiracy, but I think we can calculate it actually. What is the GDP contribution for divorce court to legal fees? I bet you it's a share of GDP.
Maybe.
It's worth looking at. It has to be a big number because if 50% of people divorce, and it's so how many households is that a year? 5 million, 10 million, 25 million. I don't know the number. 5 million every 5 years. So 5 million times $600 or $1,200 an hour times how many hours, and we start adding up the number.
Not everybody uses lawyers, but your point is valid.
So let's say that money doesn't go to those lawyers and it stays in the pocket of those households. Well, it's empirical. They would have a little more savings than they have, more buying power. I think that's a better use of their money.
Yep.
That's a very off-the-wall, controversial, not controversial
That doesn't really answer my question, though. Do you think we will win? I mean, if you were to put money in the market.
I do. I'm a bit uncomfortable answering this because it's not about thinking. It's more like I'm like, what am I going to do kind of person. Mm-hmm. And if I have a say in it, right, if there's something that I can do, I will force the outcome, right? I just don't want to put a red dot on my back. Oh, there's some American guy's crazy.
You already have that dot on your back. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I definitely would do something about it, So like if I, if I work for a pharmaceutical company and I make a breakthrough in insulin, I'm putting the manufacturing here and bankrupting the rest of them. And I'm immediately going to cripple their industry. I'm going to go about it from a very mercantilist perspective, just like they do. And there is no shame in that. It's not about values. It's about surviving. Cut this crap out. Don't waste my time with setting examples and all this. Look, morals are great for households. They're great for communities. But when it comes to surviving at a country, you got to park it on the side sometimes. Let me ask you a question. If we had the values we have today, would we have won World War II?
Well, I think you kind of said to yourself that we...
Or the Cold War.
United States has a shared set of values, and it's probably trickled down through many, many generations. So I have to assume we would, because if you're looking at what's happening in Ukraine right now, the United States is doing everything but putting its own boots on the ground, and even that it's doing. But
South Korea was a dictatorship, right? But it's an OECD member. Ban Ki-moon was a Secretary General of the UN, right? And it's a great U.S. ally, one of my favorite places, okay? We backed a dictator, and it worked out for us. So my lesson is no shame in backing dictators if there's a path to transition. If the U.S. didn't back dictators in the Cold War, would we have won the Cold War? I don't think so. And if someone say, well, you just follow this moral compass, you're going to win, that's guessing. I want the actual data-driven calculation, not the emotional one. And I'm saying that we have to be very pragmatic in our foreign policy. It shouldn't matter to us if they have a perfect human rights record or not. The question is it going to help us on our ends? It has to be very game theoretic at a national level in foreign policy, not emotion virtue signal driven.
I think we are about to experience that very question. I mean, I think we are in Cold War III, or Cold War II, rather.
People are, I heard this one, they're like, oh, Zelensky, Ukraine's corrupt. I'm like, so? So what? So what? You're really going to make a foreign policy decision over that righteousness? What a stupid. The question is, does it benefit us? Yes, it benefits us.
Yeah, I mean, everything I've read on the stats basically say that we're just destroying the war machine of Russia very, very, very quickly for the dollars we're spending on it.
This brings up a very interesting point about that. When it comes to like China or Russia, I want to use the Russian example to talk about China. So Russia is engaged in a lot of self-inflicted wounds, okay? China engages in a lot of self-inflicted wounds too. In fact, I think I said this earlier, China's national security strategy is just self-inflicted wound plus some goals, right? I mean, all they had to do was not constantly state to the world that they want to destroy the United States and run the world order. Like, all you had to do was not do that, right? And not boast and defend things that the rest of the world find inappropriate and show some humility. Okay, that's it. All you had to do. And the fact that they couldn't do that is a self-inflicted wound over something as worthless as pride and emotion, useless things in terms of pragmatism, useless things, right? Surviving in 25 years is much more important than how you feel today, right? So it's a self-inflicted wound. And so I joke that the top Chinese national security strategy is self-inflicted wound. And when we talk about cyber war with China, they say, oh, they would never attack a U.S. bank because it'll hurt them. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, their little national strategy is self-inflicted wound. Of course they would do that. Of course they would do something to the U.S. that hurts themselves. It's already what they do. That is who they are. And so that's the funny thing. So then you would say, well, why do Americans throw up these arguments? You know why? Because they don't want to work on Saturday and Sunday to do something about it. And that's the most dishonest reason.
So do you think we're going to end up in actual real kinetic war with China?
No, I think it's going to be all cyber.
All cyber.
No, well, you can stimulate capital flight in cyber. You can end the economy. You can create food lines, right? So, and the interesting thing about that is there'll be a level of disinformation, right? So you can imagine this. So China, let's say at Silicon Valley Bank, let's say that we have a counterfactual. Let's say it was a cyber attack, just a different parallel universe, okay?
Yeah, of course.
And they deleted the deposit records by breaking RSA to get in without a lot of vulnerability research. They just record, decrypt, grab the passwords in the system, delete the deposit records, or they social engineer somebody to give them access, like Stuxnet with the US being deleted, right? Now, maybe they have a backup, but in the interim, you might have capital flight, especially if you hit 2 other banks. Capital flight. Guess what? That 18 trillion US economy doesn't mean anything anymore, because like in 1997, in the financial crisis in Asia, right, South Korea's currency went to zero, and people mailed in jewelry to bail the government out. They had a robust economy, producing ships, producing cars, and it all meant nothing because you collapsed the currency. Well, do you think the U.S. is invulnerable to that? No. The dollar is very important. And also, these Americans who are against the dollar, you're the dumbest person in the world. That is America's primacy and power. And they're like, well, America should not apologize for nothing. I want America to be powerful, because then when I go do business and you piss me off, I'm going to go to the U.S. Embassy and find the FBI attaché, and I'm going to fuck you up. And you should be not ashamed to do that. You want powerful friends, and the dollar is America's powerful friend. I don't want the world to be a more fair place. I want a world that benefits America and me, right? Because that benefits women's rights, that benefits progress, that benefits all the things we fight for. So why would you not want that? To have those things, you need a powerful country, or you're not going to have any of it. Your protests will be worthless then. They will roll over you with their tanks, just like the tank man in China. The only thing holding up the American debate between left and right is a powerful America, powerful dollar. And if you don't want that, then you don't want any of this to survive. Your Bitcoin dreams and stuff like that, I don't want that. I want a powerful American military that everyone's afraid to screw with, because that also guarantees a powerful dollar, right? And those kind of things. And I don't understand why this is so difficult for people to ration. Some Americans, they only think about themselves. I saw this former CIA officer. He really disappoints me, because he was on, not Joe Rogan, another show, and he was saying that if China rises, he's going to leave out of the U.S. and get a new passport. What a wimp. This is your family. This is your tribe. These people will do something for you if you ask. If you tell them you're a former CIA officer and I need help from you because, my wife got outside of the car, they're going to be heroic for you. They're going to do something. And your love is not mutual. Fuck you.
Well, we are basically out of time here. Can you tell me something about your company now? I think it would be good to roll this all together. Like, what do you do? How do you contribute to solving this problem?
My company is focused on preventing the world being unprepared for the end of the shelf life of the encryption we use. So all of the encryption we use, from RSA to elliptic curve cryptography, the NSA has removed from the approved list. And on CNSA 2.0, the commercial algorithm list, those are all removed, considered no good. The G7 recognizes this threat. There was a discussion there for this encryption problem. Germany recognizes it. The French recognize it. South Korea recognizes it, right? And the idea is we have to move to a new cryptography, and the lead candidate is a lattice algebra-based cryptography called kyber, and it can directly replace most of the use cases for RSA. When paired with AES, can also have end-to-end. AES, not all configurations of AES, like AES GCM, 256 GCM, is considered post-quantum. Post-quantum encryption is AES or better. The only problem with AES is that it's been around a very long time. And so there is this question of, statistically, it must have a shelf life then near some end. So there is this rush around the world to develop new cryptography with longer shelf life. They call it post-quantum, but nothing about it is quantum. It just means that it survives this future imagined idea of a quantum computer. It's really easy for mathematicians to figure that out, because is there any imagined mathematical attack that would shift an NP hard problem to some other, like an NP, So we can know all of that now. And so what mathematical problems that we know that there's no advantage a quantum computer would give to solve. And lattice algebra-based kyber one's one of them. I think it's learning with squares or something like technical like that, right? So people believe, cryptographers believe it survives. And so we focus on that. Cryptography alone is not enough. So you have to scale it. You have to get, it has a larger key size. So you want to pair that in our case with high performance networking.
How much larger?
I don't know, like McLeese is like a megabyte.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. But kyber is smaller. I don't know the size. The key size is like, it fits up a whole screen. So that also means that in our case, we pair that with high performance networking tools. So we have super high throughput. We can actually achieve terabit networking and line speed. So we're a networking company that has competence in cryptographic constructions and make it interoperable with today's system so that the transition cost is not very expensive, right? Our idea is that we should be able to transition to this new cryptography, and we should be able to lower the IT cost of your company. And we do that by focusing on software-defined solutions. I don't care whether you call it SASE, Zero Trust, right? A lot of these things are nearest neighbor, right? So we focus on software-defined networking, but because we use the cloud, you can call it SASE. I don't really care what you call it. And we focus on high-throughput solutions that use post-quantum encryption in that. And the idea is we're going to integrate in IT networks for companies, lower their costs so they don't have to buy custom hardware. That's also exacerbated by the chip shortage, right? So we're going to lower IT costs. And then with one API call, when you want to upgrade to the new encryption standard, we just do it one API call across the whole network, the firewall, the VPN, and everything. So the idea is that we are an IT company that happens to ready companies to transition, and we ready them by...
and to be clear, the reason why you would switch to another algorithm is because that one is found to be vulnerable.
Not only that, but FIPS, which is Federal Guideline for Encryption, is going to roll out a new one called 140-3. That's the new standard. And that's likely going to include kyber. So, and HIPAA, for example, healthcare follows FIPS. So the private sector will be moving on post-quantum encryption in 24 months. And if you want to sell products to the U.S. federal government, you should be meeting the new guidelines for CNSA 2.0, which includes kyber, and it removes elliptic curve and it removes RSA.
That's not a very long time horizon.
No, you only have 24 months.
That is really
so
fast.
If you sell a new product within 24 months to the U.S. government, and you're using elliptic curves, you might run into some problems.
I mean, why would they buy anything at this point that's not already putting this in place? Because there's more technical debt they're going to have to unwind.
100%. So there was this misconception that the transition would be expensive. So my company's value proposition is that we are going to make the global transition to post-quantum encryption an actual cost-saving endeavor. And we do that by just accelerating the adoption of software-defined solutions in IT, which are less expensive to operate. So we kind of pairing two different deep techs together into one. And so we transition you to post-quantum encryption with an encryption agile IT network as a service, right? A SASE or SDN. We have an SDN. So think of it like an app store. You want a firewall, we deploy that firewall. You want a switch, you would deploy the switch. You want a VPN, we'll deploy the VPN. You want out-of-band network management. The one platform supports it all. You want a post-quantum encrypted, we do an API call. It's all post-quantum encrypted. Our implementation, we have some customers in government. We really know what we're doing when it comes to cryptographic constructions. One of the problems with post-quantum encryption is that although the NSA has approved it, there is no NIAT profile. So there's no process to evaluate the software implementation yet. And so, going back to the beginning of this conversation, actually earlier today, I was talking to someone from an investment bank about this, and a very senior person, and a VP, but not like the kind of VP that gets to the title. He's actually somebody of real importance to the company. And I said, "Are you familiar with CNSA 2.0?" He's like, "Oh my God, no." And I said, "Yeah, this is a big deal, and the NSA is in a hurry because there is something wrong." The White House signed 3 memos in 18 months on the move to post-quantum encryption.
Yeah, I saw that.
That means something is wrong if the president is writing orders for it, right?
it's such a weird thing to care about unless it's something.
It's a problem, right?
Yeah.
I think somebody. I know. Well, I won't say any of that. There are things underway that you bring the best CISO in the room, and he'll say that's not possible, and he's wrong. If you told me that we can't factor fast enough to break RSA 4000, I would say that's a pretty bad bet. Because if that were true, why is the White House in a panic? And why did the NSA remove it completely?
Interesting. And do you think it's more likely that it's a factoring problem or more likely that it's a bad prime, picking the wrong primes?
No, I think that an engine will exist that can break it no matter what you do, fast.
That's crazy. That's really bad news. But what do you do if you have a browser what do you do if you're Google?
Well, I think Google's gonna, so in the post-quantum encryption challenge, there is an internal discussion for the cryptographers, including DJ Bernstein participates. And there was a discussion as early as last week about a cryptographer from Google discussing it. I think Google's gonna roll kyber into the browser. Google is moving fast. I think you're gonna see post-quantum encryption in TLS. Amazon's working with it. I think that in 24 months, you're gonna see a huge movement. Also, those large companies serve the U.S. federal government. A big percentage of revenue for AWS is the U.S. federal government. If they make their federal government products one, they're probably going to also the commercial as well.
That means we need to roll out a new version of TLS like tomorrow.
Well, there's a lot of effort underway. So Amazon AWS has a post-quantum encrypted TLS. There's open source versions for it, and the people are moving in that direction. Wow. It's happening fast. When I was in Asia, the Chinese are doing research. They're testing on mobile networks post-quantum encryption. Maybe this is the race no one knew about, but it's a race happening extremely fast. It coincides with geopolitical conflict too. It's moving very quickly. Unfortunately, I wish Europe was more on the same page with the U.S. because we have bigger fish to fry than arguing about whether the NSA is going to spy on them or not, or German are, and that is just surviving it all. And I think that we take for granted that if there is a cyber attack that involves breaking RSA with an engine that just can break it no matter what you do, and that's publicly known, well, we have a halt to global commerce. And so these debates that they're having should be saved for another day, in my opinion.
And to be clear, you don't have to break very much to break a lot. You could just break one certificate that can sign all other certificates, and now you're off to the races.
It's also about how it's broken. So if you forge a certificate, that's one thing, right?
It's still really bad. That
happened a lot, though.
Yeah. It does. You don't even really need to do any of the crazy stuff we're talking about, because in the browser you have root certs from all these different countries already. I mean, you're already screwed. But this just makes it so much worse because you can't even. There's no way to even tell what's happening in that case if it's forged.
Well, imagine if somebody breaks RSA, but because they can just factor the primes no matter what with an engine. And then they publish that that's what they did after the attack. Then you're talking about the end of e-commerce.
Yes, that would be much worse.
And I think that that's the type of capability we're talking about. That's when we say the risk of quantum computers. We're talking about that.
Okay, but what if you say you did it and actually you use some side channel attack or some kind of known exploit or something? And
yeah, that's a very interesting point, because I would imagine that the result would be very scary, right?
And similar.
Yes, and I think that these are legitimate concerns that governments have. And if someone will say, like I said, that the person who has the capability would never do that, just like they would never invade the Ukraine, just like they would never self-inflict wound on stopping the spread of COVID because you were afraid of the blowback from people going home to Lunar New Year. I don't buy that. They absolutely would.
Okay, as I suspected, we got through maybe half of this stuff. But I really appreciated you coming, Kevin. Where can people reach you, find out about your company?
Yes, you can find me at ambit.inc, ambit.inc. Ambit stands for American and bit, American binary. So ambit.inc, and we have a software-defined network platform that deploys a number of products for a company, and it's encryption agile with the option of upgrading to our implementation of kyber at the network layer, which is high throughput. We're doing like 3,450 megabits per second at the network layer with no hardware accelerators. So we were leveraging from high performance computing tools that Cisco and others use. And we just try to have a very fast, clean system. We also have some other capabilities. We're able to put post-quantum encrypted VPN on a SIM card. We do a little bit of work with federal, so we definitely have some bespoke capabilities that are very valuable. We do obfuscated communication as well. And we're a pretty interesting company. I think I'm really proud of my team and what we do. I love my work. It's a playground. Yeah. I like our mission. I like that we're trying to preserve our mission essentially is to preserve the global economy, ensure that commerce survives, right? And this is not about conflict. This is about making everybody safe from their worst inclinations. If everyone in the world is post-quantum encrypted, then we don't have to so much worry about somebody doing something that is a self-inflicted wound, right? Which people show a history of doing. So if we want to protect ourselves from our worst selves, then we should work together as a world to ensure the capability to do that to the economy doesn't exist.
I mean, the second I found about your company, I was all in and definitely was happy to help where I could. Okay, so how do people find you in particular, like your blog or your personal writings?
I'm on LinkedIn, and that is my primary. I don't have social media, so
no yes. Twitter, no Facebook.
No. Okay. No Facebook, definitely. No Instagram or any of those things.
Okay.
So I don't want to be caught up in the cognitive warfare machine of having
TikTok.
No TikTok. I don't do any of those things. Honestly, I used to have Facebook, and I used to have a following. I was maxed out at like 5,000 friends, and I was starting to chat with a couple of famous tech people, and so I had like a little bit of a following, and I would write a lot, but it took me like the first month of not having Facebook was a little hard. Like I wanted to open it up. And after the first month, I felt amazing. Like I have no desire to look at it. And if I look at it now like junk, even if I still have the chat, right? But I don't have the Facebook installed. So my account is disabled, but I have chat. When I look at chat, I feel like I'm looking at trash. And I just don't look at anything and I close it. I don't want to. It is all trash. I'm sorry. Like the things going on in there is trash. Everything happening is trash. And it's not real life. Maybe that's my generation. And I was talking to a younger person about this. And I said, Facebook's not real, right? And they're like, yeah, but it is real for me. And I was like, not for me. And, I'll put whatever I want in there because none of it's real. Which is, I think, a little bit of danger for our generation because younger people take it very seriously. Yes. And I'd have some younger friends who are like, how can you say that? Because it's not real, I said. And I was like, seriously, it's not. And that would be a policy at my company. If someone says something dumb on Twitter or Facebook, and I don't care if you're left or right, I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. It's not real. Like, that's not real life. So who cares about that? I just devalue it in my mind. And I ask my friends to devalue it. I think that if I had an influence over young people at high school, I'd tell them, just know it's not real. Just don't use it. It's not real.
Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. We might have to do this again at some point.
Maybe with less F-bombs. But
yeah, I'm all right with it. This is uncensored. You're allowed to say whatever you want. Not like anyone's going to listen to this anyway.
Excuse me.
Kevin, this has been great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm very grateful for this opportunity.